Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Mailbag. It is Friday, so y'all know what that means. It is Friday free-for-all mailbag time, but we've got a couple things we got to discuss here right away. To begin, I need a favor from you all who are watching either live or on a recorded situation. We are aware that there have been some of you have been having buffering issues the last about week or two, and it's kind of a new thing. It's something that we are aware of. We're trying to work with YouTube. I can't replicate the problem. They can't replicate the problem. So if you are having that problem, if it is at all possible that you screen record a section where that's happening and then send that to me, that is what YouTube has asked for. I will get that to them. You can email me at brian@irishbreakdown.com. We are trying to get it fixed. But again, it's not something that's on our end. It's on the YouTube end. And we're trying to get it fixed. So that's how you can help us. If you're having that problem, please let us know and send that to me at brian@irishbreakdown.com. Also, some breaking news we'll discuss. I'm sure there's going to be questions about it. Notre Dame just had a decommitment from the 2023 class, Cedric Urban Jr. So, Vince, I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there's going to be questions about it. So let's just kind of kick the show off with it, right?
Smart.
This is not an overly surprising thing. If you all are paying attention to what Notre Dame is doing on the recruiting trail, they have continued to recruit running backs and a lot of running backs. I think Cedric Urban is a quality player. He was, for me, I believe, my lowest ranked offensive recruit in the class. I'm going to have to go back and look at my numbers. He's a quality player. You know, I think Cedric was in a situation where he was going to be able to kind of have a jump this year as he kind of got to a new school and was going to be used more. He's a quality back, but he's not a big time back in my opinion. So, I think that it's a situation, Vince, where they realized that they can and needed to continue to recruit even better backs or better, at that position. And there's some guys that he was my number 5 out of 5 commits, by the way. There were other guys that they liked. So they continue to recruit Jayden Lamar, and he's going to commit on May 26th to Notre Dame, Oregon, Michigan, or I'm trying to remember who the fourth one is for him. But so I knew Notre Dame, Michigan, Oregon are in that conversation for Jayden Lamar. Arizona is the fourth school for him. And they're continuing to recruit Jeremiah Love, who is going to be on campus for an official visit in June. And they're going to be hosting 5-star Richard Young for an official visit. Now, do we think they're going to get Richard Young? No. At this point in time, however, what have I always said? If a kid's willing to take a visit, especially an official visit, you got a puncher's chance. But we don't expect that to happen. But what Notre Dame was doing was they were going to recruit Jayden Lamar as a running back, and they were going to recruit Jeremiah Love as an athlete, but maybe give him a shot at running back. And I believe that Cedric, who's been a very loyal commit in this class, I mean, he has not like taken other visits. He's been a good kid. Right, he's done everything right. There's great respect for the kid, and I'll be pulling for Cedric Urban Jr. wherever he goes, as long as it's not Michigan. I kid. I'll be pulling for him wherever he goes. It just was a thing but Notre Dame's got to recruit the best that they can get. And there was just a lot of guys on the board that were better than him. And he committed to the previous offensive staff, obviously. Right. And
that's something to consider
that
too.
That has to be factored in as well. And so I would imagine that he had a conversation with Notre Dame, and Notre Dame let him kind of know, yes, you're committed. We honor your commitment. I don't believe they would have forced him out. I don't believe. But I think they would have also been honest with him about, we're gonna take a couple more backs. Because what we have said, Ryan and I have reported all along, is if they can get Jayden Lamar and Jeremiah Love, they're taking both of them. It reminds me a lot of what happened last year with Jack Nickel, if you remember correctly, where they took Jack Nickel way too early at tight end. And there just was better tight ends on the board. And so they kept pushing for Holden Stace and Eli Raridan, and they told Jack Nickel, we're taking both of them if we can. And I think Jack Nickel saw the writing on the wall, and I believe that's what's happening here with Cedric Urban Jr. So he's a quality back. I graded him out as a 4-star player, a top 300 caliber kid. I think that's the range he is in, sort of like 275 to 325. but I gave him a 4-star upside grade because I don't see a huge ceiling for him to get a lot better. I think his ranking will improve if he gets used more. I think he's a quality back. I think he's a kid that there's going to be a lot of Power 5 schools are going to like this young man. As I said, I think he's done everything right, Vince. From what I can tell, from what I know, I think he's done everything right. But at the same time, Notre Dame has to continue to make sure that they're bringing in the best possible players they can get. And there's a gap between him and Jayden Lamar, and then there's a gap between Jayden Lamar and Jeremiah Love, in my opinion. And Jeremiah Love grades out even higher than Jayden Lamar. Jayden Lamar grades out higher than Cedric Urban Jr. And the concern I always had is, you're taking Irvin and Lamar. They're very similar players, and I never quite understood why you'd take both. I would have preferred Jayden Lamar, but with Cedric Urban already in the class, it just didn't make a lot of sense when there was better backs on the board, especially Jeremiah Love, who is a different kind of back. So now you have a potential to still get a 2-back class, but it's 2 better backs and 2 different backs. Now, they got to close on both of those guys, right? That's the key. I'm not telling you, that's not me dropping hints like they're going to get a commit from Jayden Lamar and Jeremiah Love. I feel really good about where things stand with Jayden Lamar. He's got, again, it's a closeout time. He's 6 days away from making his decision.
It's less than a week.
Right. They got to close out. With Jeremiah Love, I think Notre Dame's in a good place, but there are other schools that he likes that are pushing hard for him. So that is not a done deal by any stretch of imagination. But I think now it makes it easier for them to pitch, dude, we like you at running back. So much so that this is kind of the direction we're going. So I think that's kind of the best way I can explain kind of how things are going at running back and why this move may have happened. So it's not an overly surprising move. It's not one that I had been told was going to happen, but the writing had kind of been on the wall for a little bit. So Cedric Urban Jr. has decommitted from Notre Dame. That's the backstory. And I know we had questions about it, so I just wanted to kind of kick the show off.
Love it.
With that and jump right into it. So, Vince, that's the deal. That's the show. So let's get rocking and rolling.
All right. Well, it's Friday, which obviously means it's the mailbag. And that means that John A1 has loaded us up with some questions. No surprise there. Thank John. And his first one out of the gate. When discussing the 22 wide receivers, it was mentioned Notre Dame needed a player with yak skill set, yards after catch. Outside of Gallagher, is there any prospect that would bring the yak skill set that Notre Dame needs?
Vince, I think for me, I don't know if there's anybody on the board right now that is a pure receiver that has that ability, like Gallagher. I think if they were to get Micah Tease, and if he was dead set on playing receiver, he would be the closest thing to that. And obviously right now things are not trending in a good direction for Rodney Gallagher. If you want to know more, get on the message board. We broke it down with some intel last night. That's all we're going to kind of really say about that right now. There's a reason we haven't written a public article about it and things like that. So there's really nobody else that has that on the table right now. Now, there are some guys that can do things after the catch. I think Braylon James is a good after the catch player, but it's a different type of after the catch. I think Jayden Greathouse brings some after the catch things, but it's a bigger guy, can run through arm tackles and then maybe get in space and make a guy miss. It's different than what Rodney Gallagher does. It's not the same. And, this is why I wanted him to take Xavion Bradshaw last year, because it's like you need that kind of guy. I think they made a mistake not taking him last year. And you hope that Rodney Gallagher could overcome that, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen right now. So there isn't that guy on the board. I mean, that I can think of, Vince, that they're in on, like Josh Manning. Josh Manning can do some things after the catch, but it's as a taller, longer speed guy. It's not that elusive, shake you kind of guy, which is, you can survive without that, but and they are recruiting some diversity at the position, which I like. It's not as much diversity if they don't get Gallagher, because you don't have that kind of jet sweep, bubble screen, tunnel screen type of weapon, but at least they're not just recruiting kind of the same guy over and over. So no, they don't really have that similar guy on the board other than Micah Tease. That would be the only thing for me, is if Micah Tease is dead set on being a wide receiver, and you want him, he would be my replacement for that. And I would gladly take that. But I still like him even more on defense. So that would be my stance on that. But very, very good question, John.
You knew this was coming. Dipping the toe back into the Saban rant. He says, watching national shows yesterday, they all seem to be against Saban's rant. I personally don't like the messenger, but why does the national sports media work to destroy college football?
Because there are a bunch of idiots, if I'm going to be honest with you, and there are a bunch of so much of the media has become clickbait. right? And it's the same reason that no matter what happens, they always like take the
Right.
player's side, and so these same idiots that because their thing is it's CYA. Part of it's CYA too, because these are the same idiots that have been pushing for the transfer exemption and NIL, without pressuring the NCAA to the point where the NCAA just said, fine, here, you want it, you got it, which is a dumb move. Right. And so now it's like, big bad Saban. He's always winning championships and beating everybody. And he's so mean. I don't like Saban. I went off on Saban a couple times in the last month. I've railed against where he will talk the talk, but then not walk the walk. Sure. Right. But there's this really silly modern thing where if I don't like the messenger, then I dismiss the message. And that is stupid, ignorant, and anti-intellectual. Okay, because no matter what I think of Nick Saban, the message is correct. The other part of it, too, is if they take Saban's side, then they have to then go do their jobs, which is to say, this is going on, something has to be done about it. But they're not willing to do that because that's not player-friendly. And they always want to be on the side of the little guy, which I think is absurd, right? Because sometimes the little guy's wrong. Right. Sometimes the little guy is right. It's about intellectual honesty. But I just don't think there's a lot of that. And I don't think there's a lot of depth. What I have found with a lot of national sports writers, especially like with some of the small, like the Yahoo, and there's a guy like that that works for Yahoo, Eric Edholm, who I like a lot. But there's also a guy that does a lot of college football stuff who I think is just an idiot. And what I think is they're people who aren't good enough to be like political writers. So they get shuffled down to sports, and they still want to be that. And so they take these really silly, dumb stances when they really have no concept of the game. And you're seeing ESPN and a lot of these sports channels from a TV standpoint try to get more and more people associated with the game to be on there as talent, which I actually support that. I don't particularly like Booger McFarland. I don't think he's good at his job, but I like former players in those roles. I think Desmond Howard is terrible. But if I were to get rid of him, I would try to replace him with a former player. I think that former or coach. I think people that have been in the game provide a unique perspective as long as they can be intellectually honest and not always take the coach's side. Like, that's the danger. You get a coach on there, he's always going to defend the coaches. Of course. You get a player on there, he's always going to play. Find someone who's willing to call it, balls and strikes.
Call a spade. They
are, right?
Right, exactly.
And so we don't have enough of that in writing. We don't have enough writers that have any idea of how the college game works. They just put their own particular, personal leanings into every subject as opposed to just reporting the news. I cannot like Nick Saban, and I don't like Nick Saban. And I've hammered Nick Saban in this forum, but I can still say, but what he's saying about this topic is 100% correct. In the article I wrote the night that he said that, I said, I basically called him a hypocrite without calling him a hypocrite, because he's saying this, but then he's out there poaching teams' players in the transfer portal, which I have a huge problem with.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that what he's saying isn't wrong.
Right.
And that's the problem. We don't have enough people with enough intellectual honesty, or maybe they're just not smart enough to understand it. That could be it too. They could just be dumb. I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm just going to say it how I feel, that they don't grasp the difference. And I've seen some people that get it. I've seen some people that understand, like, hey, Saban may be a D-bag, but he's not wrong on this, right? And other people just, they want to jump on the victim. Jimbo's not a victim.
No.
Jimbo's a cheating scumbag and not a good dude. And you watch the press conference every single time a reporter who was doing their job, because there are some, right? Like the rant I just went on, I painted with a really broad brush. That's not right, and I don't mean it like that. I'm more referring to the people that are doing what John said. There are some people out there that do their jobs extremely well. There's never a case where everybody is good or bad, right? But there's a lot of people that are taking this stance that I just don't think are good at their jobs. They're not being intellectually honest. Some of them I just have a different opinion, and that's okay. But I think a lot of them are just not good at what they do and are dishonest. But the thing with Jimbo is, when there was a reporter who kept trying to push about the collectives, and Jimbo just dismissed him. I don't know anything about that. I don't know anything about that. Move on, right? When he was asked about should the NCAA look into Saban, Jimbo didn't go there. He wasn't going to go there. Why? because he knows if they go after Saban in that regard, then Saban's going to turn them right back to College Station, and Jimbo doesn't want that. He wanted his moment of, woe is me, poor picked on Jimbo, and people fed right into it. I thought he acted like a petulant child, right? Nick Saban did not say they cheated. He said they bought every player. He was being hyperbolic, but the fact of the matter is they did. And now he says, well, we didn't cheat. We didn't cheat with it. He didn't say you were cheating. He said you bought your players, right? Which you have admitted in the past you're basically doing until you realize people didn't like it. And then you're like, no, I don't know. We didn't do anything. We just working hard. Shut up, Jimbo. You're a liar and a fraud. You ruined Florida State. And now you're getting all this hype for going 8-4 every year. And that's what I loved about that Joey Molinaro thing yesterday. It's like,
that's not going to work.
8-4 and Outback, congrats, So I don't get it. I dislike Nick Saban in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly.
I think he's a hypocrite in a lot of ways. But again, I don't have to like the messenger to understand and accept that the message that's coming out of his mouth is correct. And that's the biggest problem for me, is there's so many of the responses on Twitter, they don't actually embrace what Saban said and argue against it, how he's wrong. There's one guy that did, and I didn't agree with that guy, but I engaged with him because he was at least coming at me with a point of view that he was trying to defend. And I respect that.
Yeah, right.
I respect, even though I didn't agree with him. But so many other people I just ignore because they're like, oh, well, Saban's doing this. Like, what are we in the third grade? Well, he started it, like, give me a break. So, to me, I dislike Nick Saban, but I also know that what Nick Saban is saying is truth and is accurate. And here's the thing. People are like, oh, he's just upset because Texas A&M's beating him. No, he's not. They finished with the number 2 class. What Nick Saban said very clearly is, we're not doing this right now. But if it doesn't stop, we will.
Yeah, he's like, we will do it. I mean,
and they'll do it better than everybody else.
Look, you can dislike Nick Saban, and I'm not saying you specifically, but like
it's okay. I do. I think he's a phenomenal coach, but I dislike him. I think he's right. I think he's someone who says one thing, but then goes out and does the other. And as long as he's been doing this, he's not that stupid that kids are going in the portal and that day telling Alabama they're coming, and you can't tell me that he's doing that. And I just thought it took us 20 minutes to convince this kid to come. He's full of crap.
Right.
But again, it doesn't mean that what he's saying isn't true.
And I will also say that, he has been as successful as he has been as a coach because he's generally on the cutting edge of coaching, right? I mean, he completely changed his offense after 2012, and because he saw the writing on the wall in college football. He knows how to coach. There's no two ways about it. And he'll be on the cutting edge of the NIL stuff if that's what it takes to compete at the highest level of college football. And he's pointing out that, like, look, if this doesn't change, then we're going to do it too. And just letting you guys know, we're going to be diving into this pool too, but it's not right. But if that's what it takes, then that's what we're going to do. And I don't want to say I respect him, but I respect the message. I do. He's being open about it. He's being open about it.
Right. And anyway, so that's and we talked a lot about this yesterday. We need to keep talking about it. But yeah, I find so much of what we find in the national media to be just lazy and groupthink. That's the other part. And Antoine, our resident Michigan fan, made a comment about this too. Is like, look, the reality is if you take the wrong stance on something, you could get shunned. I mean, you could get kind of, left out of the parties and, not take that popular stance. And there's a lot of people that don't like people not liking them.
Right.
I personally don't understand that. I mean, obviously I've taken a lot of stances that have gotten me shunned from many of the Notre Dame beat in recent years. I don't care because I don't write for them. I write for fans and I want to give them the honest truth. And sadly, there just aren't enough people that do that, and there's always some, but there just aren't enough. And so there's a lot of people that just, okay, well, what's everybody? Okay, that's where everybody's going. So let me go that direction too. Let me pile on. And I'm not surprised at all that most people are taking Jimbo Fisher's side. It's not surprising at all. It's what I would have been more surprised if they didn't. It's just because that's the nature of what the sports media has become in so many different ways.
Well, John A1 is bringing the heat, and I think this is a fun one to kind of toss around a little bit, kind of flying under the radar because of the Saban and blah, 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 is this conference stuff. So he says it seems conferences are deciding not to have divisions to free up scheduling. Will this increase the quality of non-conference games, and will it make it easier for Notre Dame to schedule opponents within 2 to 4 years versus 10 years down the road, with the exception of 21 Florida State, to meet the intent of quality of opponent?
So basically, John, what it looks like teams are looking into doing is getting rid of divisions and going to more of a pod scheduling. So like the ACC, what is it? It's like 3-5-5, right? Like there's 3 rivals that they're going to play,
Right.
and then there's 2 other groups of 5 that they'll
Rotate
play.
to 5 or something like
Right.
that. Yeah.
My hope is if you do it right, I think it makes the conference scheduling better. Because we've talked about this, how infrequently that Alabama and Georgia play each other in the regular season. And I'm gonna pull it up now because it's actually kind of pathetic if we're being honest about it. And I'm gonna pull this up now. So now they've played each other a decent amount, like when you look at postseason, but if you go back and look at the this Winsipedia thing is actually really helpful when it doesn't have all those pop-up ads. The last time that they played, so they played in Tuscaloosa in 2020. So that was last year, right? 2020. And Alabama won 41-21. And then the rest of the games, SEC championship in 2018, college football playoff in 2018. The last time they played in a regular season game before that was 2015. And then they played in the 2012 SEC title game. And then the last time they played a game was in 2008.
Wow.
So from 2021 to 2008, Alabama and Georgia have played each other 3 times
In
the regular season.
14 years, right?
Right. And so it's like, how is that possible? Right. And so I don't like it. I don't think it. I think it's bad for conferences. We've talked about how infrequently Ohio State plays Iowa.
Right.
And things like that. And so if they're willing to kind of the point behind it, they say, is that it's going to create more teams are going to start playing each other more.
Right.
And now there are some teams are going to play each other less. So Ohio State's not going to play necessarily if the Big Ten were to do it, right? It would mean Ohio State's not going to play Michigan State maybe every year unless they're part of that, that right
rivalry,
part of that protected, they'll always play Michigan kind of thing, and they'll have 2 or 3 of those. I'm good with that. Like,
people always play each other,
right? Like North Carolina should always play Duke. They should always play NC State, right? Have those, right? But then mix up who you play in the other division. So I like the idea of it. I don't think it impacts the non-conference schedule a ton because as long as they're still playing 8 to 9 conference games, I don't think it impacts the conference schedule, the non-conference schedule at all. What I'm curious about, however, is I think to John's point is I'm curious how far down the road they're going to make these schedules. How to depending on what the format is, right? And so, does that make teams more susceptible to say, hey, look, this is what our schedule is going to look like. We may need to jump on and schedule somebody tough because looking at our schedule in 4 years, barring things changing, it may not be good enough for us to get to the college football playoff, or it's going to be super hard. So let's, I'm curious how that's going to be. I don't have an answer to that, John. I don't think it's going to, just on the surface, I don't think it's going to necessarily have an impact on Notre Dame's ability to schedule non-conferences or teams overall changing their non-conference approach. I think the only thing that could really change and force teams to play more good teams is the College Football Playoff Committee. I think that's the only entity that could really encourage teams to play tougher schedules. Put a 2-loss team in there that played a really tough non-conference schedule and maybe lost a close game. Here's an example. Let's say Ohio State plays Notre Dame and loses by a field goal late. And then let me pull up their 2022 schedule here real quick, just so I can kind of make this point. So let's say Notre Dame goes 11-1 or runs the table, and Notre Dame's a top 3 seed. Notre Dame's a 2 seed or a 1 seed, right? Let's say Notre Dame's really good this year. And let's say they beat Ohio State by a field goal. And then you look down at Ohio State's schedule. They got to play Wisconsin. They've got to play Michigan State. They got to play Iowa. They got to play at Penn State. They got to play Michigan. So let's just say that they lose that September 24th game against Wisconsin, or they lose at Michigan State on the 8th. And they go through and they beat a Michigan. Let's say Michigan's in the top 10. They beat Michigan. Let's say that Penn State's ranked this year and they win at Penn State. They beat Iowa, who's ranked. And you're like, man, they had some great wins this year. If they just wouldn't have played Notre Dame in the non-conference, they'd be in the playoff. And I'd like for the committee to sometimes look at that and say, you know what? We're going to take that 2-loss Ohio State team who challenged themselves out of conference with a playoff caliber team and battled them for 4 quarters over this 12-1 team from the Pac-12 or the ACC who played a bunch of nobodies out of conference, right? Or Big 12 or whatever that played a bunch of nobodies out of conference, because it's better for the game when teams push themselves out of conference,
Agreed.
right? And so I would like to see that. I would like to see the committee do that, as long as, again, there's not like a bad blowout. It's, you don't take a 11-2 Ohio State over the 11-1 Notre Dame team that beat them at their place. But you get the point that I'm making, right? Like, I would like to see them reward the team that played the tougher schedule, because sometimes you can have 2 losses and be better than a team that has 1, because that team that had 1 didn't play anybody. To the point you were making about Marshall yesterday, Vince, I think this is where you're coming from. Like, I'm talking about they're a bowl team. You didn't play a Power 5 team. Well, yeah, if they played in the ACC, they're like 2-10. Right. I mean, I think that's a good point. My point, however, is that in that regard, it's a different conversation. When we're talking about the best of the best, though, I think sometimes you can have an 11-2 record and another team has a 12-1 record, and you can look at that and say that 11-2 team is the better team and had better wins.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
But the reason they lost 2 games is because they played Notre Dame, whereas this other team, and I keep wanting to use Clemson, but that's a bad example because Clemson plays Notre Dame as well this year, right? So, but like some years where Clemson schedules is really bad, and it's like it's not their fault,
right?
You know, right. But, you know, maybe you reward a team like Ohio State who plays in a much tougher division, but also played out schedule out of conference. So if Clemson has a loss, let's say Ohio State goes 11-2, loses to Notre Dame by field goal. Let's say they lose to Wisconsin at home, you know, or let's say they lose to Michigan State by a field goal and there's an injury or something like that. And they go 11-2 and win the Big Ten, beat Penn State on the road, beat Michigan, you know, pound Michigan, and then win the Big Ten championship. And then Notre Dame plays Clemson and they pound Clemson. And Clemson goes 11-1, 12-1, because Clemson would then play in a conference championship game. Well, if Clemson goes 12-1, Vince, this year, you know, there's a chance that they went 12-1 without really beating anybody worth a darn.
Sure.
You know, because the rest of their schedule is the rest of their non-conference schedules: Furman, Louisiana Tech, and South Carolina. Well, if South Carolina is better this year, maybe if they're like, you know, all of a sudden break out in the East, but then the rest is at Georgia Tech, at Wake Forest, home against NC State, at BC, at Florida State, home against Syracuse, home against Louisville, home against Miami. If the ACC has been what it's been, they're not going to have nearly the wins that Ohio State would have, even though Ohio State has 2 losses.
Right.
That should be factored in. They have a common loss, and that would benefit maybe in Clemson's favor because Clemson lost on the road in a close game. Ohio State lost at home. But then it's got to be about who you beat.
Sure.
And that's what often gets lost in these conversations. Everybody wants to focus on the losses. But I'm like, yeah, the losses. But that's what we said about Notre Dame last year, Vince. That was the biggest drawback to Notre Dame being a playoff team when we were talking about them compared to other teams was, but who they beat.
Right, exactly.
That's the problem. You got to beat somebody. Yep. And so that may be an interesting one.
Not making it in. I mean, they didn't earn it. And they needed things to fall their way.
Right.
They didn't.
Right.
I mean, bottom line,
they needed Bama to catch a second loss and that kind of thing.
Yep.
And yeah.
It's close.
Yeah.
They were close a couple times, but yeah.
Yep. No doubt.
Oh, we got a super chat here from Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. Thank you very much. Great decision by Irving. The running back room is stacked. Plus, it will add Young and Lamar, in theory. He would never play. BD, sorry for your loss. Love you guys.
I wouldn't dismiss Jayden. I mean, Cedric Urban is never being able to play. I think I get your point though, right? Yeah. I get your point. I think the point being that, you know, those guys are just better players.
Sure.
And I would even say if you just replace Richard Young with Jeremiah Love, it's the same conversation. But I mean, I think Cedric Urban's good enough to where, yeah, he could do some damage. I mean, he could battle, or if a guy gets injured, he gets his chance to play. I don't want to disrespect him that way, but I also do think it's a smart decision by him.
Yeah.
And Cedric, obviously his dad played at Michigan State, and he's a good back. Look, this isn't going to be one of those things where it's like, hey, decommitted so we can really tell you how we feel. We've told you how we feel all along. He's a quality player.
That'll never be.
Yeah.
You're never going to get the PG version or however you want.
Right. He's a quality player, but there's just better guys on the board. And I think Cedric needs to go somewhere where to Charlie Weiss's last belt loops point, where he is going to be the guy.
More of a featured guy, yeah.
Right. And when if Notre Dame was to get, let's just say Love and Lamar, and then you get Payne and Jadarian Price last year, of those 5 backs, with all due respect to Cedric Urban Jr., he's the 5th guy. So could he still get a chance to play? Yeah, but it'd have been tough.
Yeah, right.
Now he gets to find a school where they're going to maybe hold him in a little higher esteem. And I wish more kids would do that. I wish more kids would say, I can go to Notre Dame and be the 6th receiver, or I can go to Illinois or Cincinnati and be the number 1.
Yeah, sure.
If you have aspirations of the NFL, sometimes that can be a positive for you. If you don't think you're an NFL guy, then go to Notre Dame and be number 6 because you're going to get that degree.
Exactly.
Right. But if you have aspirations of being a next level player, then sometimes it's better to be number 1 somewhere else than to be number 6 or 5 somewhere else.
About exposure,
an opportunity. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely. We've got one more super chat that I want to get to here real quick.
Sakalowski, thank you very much. Have fond memories of watching College Game Day growing up. I can't watch or support ESPN anymore. When will IB have their own game day?
I don't know if it's going to happen this year. There's some moves I'm working on right now to try to get that started, but we do have an intention of having an Irish Breakdown game day. It'd be like, what we're thinking is probably like from 10 to noon.
Yep.
Where we would have different segments. We would bring people on to talk about the Notre Dame game for that day. But then we were thinking about like making the first hour be about Notre Dame, and then the second hour being about the big games that day. We'll break them down. We'll talk about them. It would be Vince, and hopefully we can find a host for that. But we'll see if we can make that happen. But we definitely want to do it. It's just, as with everything I've done, it's got to be done the right way.
Absolutely.
And it's got to be the right people, and we've got to make sure that we have the ability to do it. And so, of course, Vince is like, if we do it, we're going to be on site. And I'm like, let's see if we can actually just produce it first from home before we then go on site. But that's the point, though, is we're always thinking of, here's what we're going to start with, but the goals are to go here. I hope you all understand that we don't want to just, like, in 10 years, we don't want to be just doing the same show over again, right? We're trying to expand and do different things. And I think the Irish Breakdown Game Day is definitely something that we are interested in. We talked about doing it this past year, but there were so many different things going on that it just didn't make sense. It's got to require an expanded staff, and we weren't in a position to have an expanded staff going into last year. Now we are.
Right.
And so we're trying to make it happen. So yes, that is in the discussion. I can't promise that it will be a 2022 product, but I'll be shocked if we don't at least have it going by 2023. But Vince knows I'm working. I've had meetings. I've had interviews. I've done some things this week that hopefully will result in us, expanding our staff. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not. We'll have to find out.
And then it's a technology issue. You know what I mean? Right. Because we want to do it on the YouTube channel. And so if you do it on site, you got to make sure that you've got cameras and all these different things. And so, there's a lot that goes into it. And we want to make sure that we are always
do it right.
Quality product for you guys. So we probably will start at home if we do it, but either way, it's going to be
that would be, let's make sure that we get the content down first and do that kind of stuff. Then as we master that, then we can say, you know what, because remember, College Game Day didn't originally go on the road. It was originally an in-studio thing, and then eventually went on the road. The first time was Notre Dame, Florida State, 1993. Yep. So it would be a thing where it eventually would grow, and I think it'd be a lot of fun. And it wouldn't be me. I would have a segment or two, but I would want it to feature other people. I want it to have, other guests and Vince and a host and other people, bring Ryan on for a segment to talk about the recruits on campus that day. Yes. But I would want it to, because that's part of ultimately what I'd like to get to, is where I'm not necessarily on every show, or if I am, it's just as a segment, because I want to have different voices, different opinions, different talents on the shows, and bringing in outside people. So you have to understand, we have a lot of things we're planning, but these things take time to get there. You have to do it right, and that's kind of where we're at. So I do love the idea. and it is something we're working on for sure.
There's always the issue that I already do a pregame show for another company, so we have to talk about that too.
Right.
You know,
Vince is always trying to get more money out of me. Man, I swear this guy.
Spanky412 has a super chat. Thank you very much. Vince 100% has to sport the headgear each week.
I don't know how we would make that happen, but that would be pretty awesome.
I'm the Corso of this group. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, pretty much. You're the former coach, you know, there's no doubt. There's no doubt.
That's funny.
There's no doubt. I would love to be able to make that happen. I mean, I don't know how we would get all those headpieces, but
we'll figure it out.
Yeah,
that would be fun.
Be a lot of fun
and all that stuff. I mean,
what it's not going to be though is we're not just going to replicate what College Game Day does, right? No. Like we're not going to have a celebrity guest picker on. You know, like if we have guests on, we'll get their score prediction for the Notre Dame game. But you know, we're going to actually have people that watch games and study and do all that kind of stuff to be on the show. So I mean, again, we're still working through it. It's still in infancy phases, but we want the content to be excellent and not a bunch of fluff stuff and people that don't know what they're talking about, which is what you get a lot of on the current one. But we're not looking to just replicate that. If anything, if we were going to follow anybody, it would be more of the Big Noon Kickoff, because I think that's a much better product in regards to the content.
I enjoy
now the production isn't as good and all that because Fox is still trying to catch up to ESPN from that standpoint, but the content of the Big Noon Kickoff is way better than the content.
You got Tom Rinaldi
of Game Day, so that was a huge move.
If you're looking to cry before Game Day, then now you're watching Fox.
Yes. But like the football analysis, whether you agree or dislike, I'll find myself disagreeing with Matt Leinart a lot, but I never find myself saying, "What is this guy talking about?"
I do that.
Does he even watch that team? Yeah. I don't. I say, okay, I get where he's coming from, but I think this. That's what I love is having difference of opinions. I'll find myself disagreeing with Brady Quinn or Reggie Bush, but it's a disagreement that you would have with two people that know the game that just are coming from a different point of view, where I'll watch ESPN and be like, did Stephen A. Smith just talk about this guy like that hasn't played in 8 weeks? Like, like what does he even watch these teams play? Do you get these ESPN their job is to cover college football, and you're like, this guy clearly doesn't watch college football. Like, I don't know what he's watching or what he's doing in his downtime before Saturday, but this guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
Right.
I don't have that with Fox. That's the difference. And that's what we want our show to be.
Yep.
So anyway, I got super chat from my guy, Mark Stewart.
Yeah. Mark Stewart. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hey, just wanted to send good vibes. Love the show. Thanks, Mark. Love you too, man. Appreciate it very much. Is that all?
The top? Yeah. Back to the top.
Okay. This is a fun one from Coach Bent 574. Must be a local yokel. Love it.
Yes.
Brian and Vince, who is the best player you've ever coached against? I'm sure your name is going to be bigger than mine, so I'll go first. Sure. I in a sectional championship game, so that's like the championship of the first round of football in high school. We actually played a team I was coaching played against Drew Tranquil at Fort Wayne.
He's pretty good. It's a pretty good one.
We were up on them by 4 touchdowns, and he pretty much single-handedly brought them back with a couple of pick sixes, and he was playing on both sides of the ball. I've never hated a man so much in my life, and then it literally took me about halfway through his Notre Dame career for him to be like, okay, I really like Drew Tranquil.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was.
No, your answer's better than mine, I think.
Really?
Drew Tranquil's, but yeah, because again, coached against.
Okay.
Right? I coached at the Division III and 1AA level, so the best player I ever coached against was – I actually coached against Matt Campbell, head coach at Iowa State. He was at Mount Union, but Mount Union had some dudes, but like they weren't like NFL dudes. Like they had this kid, Larry Kennard, who was an Ohio State signee that ended up, going to Mount Union because he couldn't get into there. But let's say Miles Austin is probably the guy that played for the Cowboys for a minute, the receiver from Monmouth. I coached against him when I was at Duquesne. Now, if you were to say who's the best player you ever played against, that's when my answer would be a much bigger name.
I was going to say, I thought you had told me bigger names.
Yeah, Dre Bly, Plexico Burris, Deion Dyer, James Boyd. Yeah, there's some dudes back in the day when I played. But yeah, coached against it would be, as far as best meaning like names you would recognize, it'd be Miles Austin. I coached against some really good football players, but they just usually weren't NFL guys because they were smaller.
Sure.
There was a receiver. We played Hardin Simmons my first year in coaching. I think his name was Kirk Rogers, but they were really good. He spent some time with the Chiefs, so he was a pretty good player, but he wasn't as good as Drew Tranquil. No doubt about it.
Okay, I lost my spot, but I'm going back. That. I got excited. I went to the bottom. Coach Bent has another question. He says, who is the last player currently enrolled at school that you had no idea that he would pick Notre Dame or not? This is more of a recruiting question.
Yeah, as far as like when he made his decision, I'd have to think about that. I mean, more often than not, we kind of know when a guy is going to pick Notre Dame. I think the last time, I mean, I don't know if anyone on the team is someone that I went into a decision not knowing who he was going to pick. I think the last time that I can remember was Noah Boykin, but he's not at Notre Dame anymore. I'm really trying to remember the last time Notre Dame got a guy that we didn't know he was going to pick Notre Dame. I'm really struggling. I'd have to think about that one, Coach Bent. It's a good question. I like the questions where I'd have to do a little research. But I mean, we've guys have committed Notre Dame that we didn't know they were going to commit to Notre Dame like that day. That's happened from time to time, but that's different, I think, than the question if he would choose Notre Dame or not. I kind of feel like, and ironically, the player that did that ended up not signing with Notre Dame, so Morgan Walker.
Oh, yeah.
But more often than not, you kind of have an idea, especially when it's a rising senior, that he's going to pick Notre Dame. I really have to think about that one.
All
Good question.
Yes, absolutely. Quinn says, have you ever seen a player recruited as an athlete where they just couldn't find a spot for him? Jack of all trades, but master of none.
Well, you guys should come with the good questions today that I don't necessarily have all the answers to. I'm trying to think that couldn't find a – well, I thought that was going to really be the case for CJ Prosise until his last year because he wasn't a safety. He was a good receiver, but not a great receiver. He was just more of an athlete, and then he kind of had that breakout year at the end. Yeah, that's a good one, Quinn. I'd have to think about that one for a second. Vince, is there anybody that kind of off the top of your head that you can? I mean, Avery Davis was that for a while. I mean, he was a guy that was like that for a while. That he didn't fit at quarterback, he didn't fit at running back, he didn't fit at corner. But eventually, if a guy's that good, he's eventually gonna find a home.
His name escapes me, and I feel terrible about it. But it's the kid who went to Penn who transferred just recently.
Paul Moala.
Moala. Yeah. I felt like he had trouble kind of finding a home because he was kind of a tweener between linebacker and safety. And again, in Northern Indiana, I coached against him. He was all world around here. And again, it's around here.
Yeah.
But I just felt like when he got recruited to Notre Dame, he's a great player, and he was obviously in their backyard, so he was making plays. But there was just never really like a home for him because he was either stuck behind somebody or they started to have like packages for him, and then he got hurt. So
I feel like he was always kind of a defensive player.
Yes. He was always a defensive player, but never – I don't know if he ever found really a defensive player per se.
Yeah. I'd have to think about that one. That's a good one, Quinn. I'm going to think about that one, as we go through the show. I just got a text from a friend. He reminded me of somebody that did commit to Notre Dame that's currently on the team that I didn't know they were going to commit to Notre Dame at that time because it was the Adamiolas.
Oh,
so they committed early. I think they were still sophomores. But coming into their visit to Notre Dame, Michigan was the perceived leader for them. Now, we didn't know that they were going to commit, so it's a little different because there wasn't like a ceremony planned. And that's kind of how I took the question is like there's a ceremony planned day of, and the kid announces for Notre Dame when we thought it was like Manti. But I will say that when the Twins committed to Notre Dame, I didn't think Notre Dame was in a position to get them at that time because Michigan was considered – because if you remember back then, that was when Chris Partridge was at Michigan, and they were cleaning up in Jersey. I mean, they had gotten Rashawn Gary and Jabril Peppers and Chris Singleton. Like they were cleaning up in Jersey, and they were the perceived leaders for Justin and Jason. And then they visited Notre Dame, and then after that, it was history. But that's a good reminder. That's a good one. That's a really good one. There's no doubt. Somebody said this: hire John A1 as an interviewer for IB Game Day. It's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea.
I want to write that one down.
Yeah, Andrew Sakalowski said, I was totally kidding about an IB Game Day, but now I'm pumped.
So he didn't realize the can of worms that he opened up.
He did not. See, y'all have to understand is like I'm not just like, okay, well, we're doing okay, and I got a recruiting guy, and we got a show, and everything's good. I'm going to do this for the next 20 years. Right? That's not how my mind works. I'll get burned out and bored so quickly. I'm like, Vince, you can take over IB. I'm going to go climb a mountain or something.
Well, it's
you know
just
what I mean? Like I'd get super bored with that.
It's just funny how things can occur, and then all of a sudden it gets you thinking about some other things. I'll say that, right? I mean, because that's kind of what went down. It's like, oh, wait a minute. okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you never know. All right. Stone Eater?
Stonador is what I guess. That's kind of what I've settled in on after pronouncing it like 4 or 5 different ways. The first few times he or she asks questions.
Okay.
So I'm going Stonador.
Stonador.
That's the best I come up with.
If Notre Dame ever ends up dropping the USC or Navy series, would there be enough reason to justify remaining independent? If Notre Dame joined the ACC, they'd get 4 out-of-conference games for rivals and marquee games, plus a chance at a conference championship game. I don't think they ever dropped those 2 series.
Yeah, I think that's in reference to what I said yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, I hope they don't drop USC, but I would understand it. And I'm actually – I think Notre Dame needs to throw their weight around a little bit more with USC right now when it comes to the scheduling and some of those other things. Because, like, I just – if you're going to play a team that just blatantly cheats and break the rules and just go play an SEC team where you're going to get more out of beating them.
You want to prop them up.
Right.
Yeah.
And so –
yeah,
I don't – I'm a little frustrated with USC right now, to be honest with you. But I would just say find a new rival. But I still don't think dropping USC means you don't – you don't, because like you go join a conference, join the ACC. I don't think those two things equal, because the reality is right now Notre Dame's there's teams they have to turn down. There is not like I think there's just like this misguided notion from some, and I'm not saying that's about Stonador, but I think there's this notion from some around the nation, people that maybe don't necessarily follow Notre Dame or like Notre Dame, that Notre Dame's hurting for opponents. Right. Trust me, Notre Dame is not hurting for opponents.
Right.
So I don't think they'd have any problem. And I would say, again, we're going to have a show on this probably next week or two. We're going to kind of go through the perfect schedule. And what we should do, Vince, is during that section is, what would you do if you could replace USC? Because I'm never dropping Navy.
Nope.
If you could replace USC, who would you replace it with? Like a team that you're going to schedule. Like, so would you say, okay, re-sign up with Stanford and just let that one play? And I'm not going to ask you to answer that now. We'll talk about that when we do it.
I like that.
Like if you could say you've got to have 2 in order to justify. Let's take the premise of this question, and we'll discuss this when we do the show. But this is something to be thinking about, Vince. Is the premise will be if you had to have 2 yearly rivals to justify being independent, who would your 2 be if you dropped USC? And that'd be a fun conversation. So, think about that. Huh?
It's like a summer show to me.
Well, it kind of almost is. I mean, summer not on the calendar, but I mean, you're out of school in a week, so we're going to have some more fun.
I'm pumped.
See more of you. People, right. I keep telling you, every time you go a few days without being on the show, people are like, did you fire Vince? Like, what? No. Why do you keep asking this? Like, I did not fire Vince.
Okay. This is actually a great time to bring in Ryan if you're ready to go, Ryan.
Sure.
All right. I'm bringing him in. Here we go. Ben's question. On a scale of 1 to 10, rank your confidence feeling for the elite guys Notre Dame has locked in for visits. So, scale of 1 to 10. We'll just go through them. Dante Moore.
9.
Yeah.
Okay.
9.
Impemba.
6.
I'm at a 5, but I think it could jump with the visit. I think that, yeah. I think right now the Southern schools are really making a good push for him.
Okay. Downs.
6.
Yeah, and that's up for me. I was at like a 3 a couple weeks ago, but I've gathered more and more information, I'd say I'm probably still a 5. I'm still a little bit skeptical. I still got a little bit of PTSD going on with him. I'm going to say 5, but that's up from a 3 a week or 2 ago. So
I was probably a 2.
Yeah.
So
always got to one up me, don't you, Ryan?
No, that's
lower
downing you.
Yeah, no, I was even lower on him, but now I'm even higher on him. I'm totally kidding. I needed a good laugh.
All right,
but yeah, it's trending in the right direction. Is the point?
Good. Young.
Go for it. You first, Ryan.
I'm just thinking.
I'm at a 4. I'll let Ryan think. I'm at a 4 because, look, here's my stance. If you can get a kid on campus, you have a shot. If you can get a kid on campus for an official visit, you have you have a legitimate shot. It's just they could do a phenomenal job with him and finish 3rd. Yeah. I mean, it's just you never know till he's going to get on campus. Kid's never visited before. So it's hard for me to say. I don't know him as well as I knew Braylon James. I don't know, he's just a quiet, kid that doesn't do a lot of media stuff. So it's hard to really know right now. The thought of beating Bama for a running back from the South seems like a tough bit for me. But the fact is 2 years ago, Notre Dame's not even mentioned. They're not getting a visit. So and Ryan has a great article about this at irishbreakdown.com where he talked about whether they get him or not. This shows this staff's him visiting officially shows this staff's ability to recruit against the big boys, and more importantly, I think, willingness to recruit. So if you haven't read that, it's at irishbreakdown.com. Check it out. It's Ryan's article today on Richard Young, but I'm still at a 4. And if I were to change my grade from a 4, I'd go down, not up.
Yeah. I was thinking like a 2 or a 3. I mean, 4 is probably as high as I would go. I mean, we want to remain optimistic because, like you said, getting him on campus is a big step. But
right.
I've listened to some interviews he's done, Brian, and he hasn't done money. But man, he does really sound like a Notre Dame guy. He really does. He's well spoken, but I just don't say it.
And really thoughtful.
Don't. Yes.
Here's the thing: the reason I'm at a 4, not a 3, Ryan, is because it's not just a visit; it's an official, and that changes things for me because it just does. Now, it doesn't change things where I'm like, they're going to get Richard Young. I'd need to hear a lot more for that. And I won't have that feeling until the visit and we hear feedback from it. But look, they've put themselves in the game and they've shown that this staff will go anywhere for any kid and battle any school.
That's huge because that was not the case in the past. So
because you may miss on Richard Young, but every 4 years you're going to get that one Richard Young type player.
Right.
That's a program changer.
Yeah, absolutely. Osbury.
I'm at like a 7 on Jayden Osbury. I feel pretty good about it.
Sick and tired of us being on the same answers, man. 7, 7, leaning towards an 8, but I need to see how the visit goes. I think they've got a really good shot with Jayden Osbury, and that could just be my bias towards him because I love. And it's not because he's from Baton Rouge. This isn't a Brian Kelly thing. I don't care if he was from Portland, Oregon, or wherever. I love that kid's film, and I like him. Like he's just a great kid. So I'm definitely on the Jayden Osbury train as a player.
Jason Moore,
8.5. I feel good about
Jason
8. Moore. Yeah,
I feel really good about where Notre Dame is, but I think he's a kid who a visit somewhere else could potentially sway him. But I feel really good about where Notre Dame is right now.
All right, Micah Bell.
I'd say like a 6.5. I think that they're in an okay spot with him. He has a visit coming up, so it could change very drastically. I need to see how it looks after the visit, though. Personally,
I'm at a 7. I feel they're in a really good position there. I think that they got a shot to close it out on the visit. He's also another kid where visits could change things, but everything I hear from him, everything I hear from my sources, Notre Dame's in a pretty good place. Now it's about closing, and that's going to be the key.
All right, finishing off with the big uglies, Jagasaw.
I mean, it's a 9 for me if it ends today. he's
9.5 for me.
Yeah.
Just so we're clear, I'll never say a 10 unless a kid's committed.
Right.
And even then, like, I don't know if I'd say a 10 for every kid that's committed to Notre Dame right now. But I'll never say an uncommitted kid is a 10 unless he's committing tomorrow and I already know the answer. Right. But even then, I wouldn't say it because then that kind of gives it away.
Right.
But I mean, look, I feel really good about Charles Jackson. So I go like 9.5. I feel good about that one.
Monroe Freeling.
I'm at I'll say 8.5. I'm going to the halves a lot right now. Like I feel really good, but he's another one that, like Brian's kind of stated on a couple guys, there's still some visits to take. There's still a timeline that he's abiding by, right? So I think Notre Dame's in the lead, but when does it end is my biggest question on Monroe Freeling.
I'm at a 7 because I'm concerned he may not make a decision soon. And he's one of those kids that if he commits this summer, I feel right now that Notre Dame's got a really good shot to get him. If he carries this into the fall, it tells me he's not completely sold on Notre Dame, and that will open the door for somebody else. Okay. And so I'm at a 7.
Any other ones that you want to comment on, gentlemen? That aren't top.
I think those are the big boys, right? I mean, we could maybe do. What about Jayden Greathouse?
Greathouse, I feel good about. He'd be an 8 or a 9 for me. Maybe not 9. I'd say an 8. 8's good.
He's an 8 for me.
Yeah,
same way. I feel really good, but visits are going to be key, but I feel really good about that one. I do.
Nico-
Jeremiah Love, that's one I'm curious to get your opinion on, Ryan, because you talked to him.
I'd say it's a 7. I feel good about where they are, but also, I mean, the question for a while was what would the number shake out to, right? If he's a take necessarily for Notre Dame right now. Now with the Cedric Urban Jr. decommitments, I feel like numbers are in your favor a little bit more now. And I mean, I hope
you
they
can
get
sell
him in
running
the
back.
class.
That's the other thing. You can sell running back now. You
Exactly.
can't, whereas before you were athlete and all that other kind of stuff.
I'll say 7 for now. He's got another visit obviously coming up. I feel like Notre Dame can very much close it out if they kill the visit, but I just want to see it first. So I'll say 7 to be tentative, I guess.
Here's 2 I want to ask Ryan about. Number 1 is Micah Tease. Because you had an interesting take in a conversation with me yesterday, and I'm curious how you would rate that.
I'll say that he's a 6 or 7 for me right now, which is a little down from where I was. I thought that Notre Dame was probably in the lead if Oklahoma was out of the picture, but I spoke to someone pretty close to Micah yesterday that basically told me that it can go in a lot of different ways, and it's very dependent upon these visits that are coming up. So officials aren't going to be the closeout for Micah Tease, but it's going to be the indicator for me. Like, you're going to find a lot out after these official visits. So I was feeling a little better before I kind of had the conversation yesterday. Notre Dame is firmly in the conversation, but these official visits are going to be kind of a big indicator of how it's going to go.
This is the one we have a big difference on. I'm at a 5. I just there's too many things for me that tell me this kid really likes Notre Dame, but too many things that tell me that I'm not really sure he sees himself at Notre Dame. And that may sound strange, but it's like, Vince, you've been doing this a long time. Like, there's some kids that like everything about him says Notre Dame, but just for some reason they've convinced themselves that no, I can't make that move. So I hope that I'm wrong on that, but right now I'm at a 5. And then the last one for me, Ryan, is Christian Gray.
4. I don't feel good about that one at all.
I'm at a 5. Here's the thing about him is I could see them. Here's one thing I'm pretty confident in. Unless they just load up on other corners, if he commits somewhere else, and right now, if I had to predict, I'm with Ryan, I'd probably predict LSU right now. Notre Dame's not backing down from him. They're going to continue to fight. I think the visit for him to Notre Dame could be huge because it's, I just feel like he's a kid that they like. They've been on him a long time. He's a great he's a kind of like Micah Tease. He's a Notre Dame kid, one of the most Notre Dame kids in the class. Mom supports Notre Dame from everything I've been told, but she's going to support him picking whatever he wants to do. And so for me, it comes down to, does he think he's a Notre Dame kid? And if he doesn't figure it out now, can they convince him to do it down the road? Because they're not going to stop recruiting him. Unless they load up on corner, they're not going to start recruiting him because they really get they really like him, and they're not going to give up on him. Here's an interesting one along those same lines, Ryan, is Kevin Carter asks, does anyone else kind of get vibes with Christian Gray, kind of like a Maureen Walker? Maybe it's just me, but everything just seems like they're being played. I want to say this. They're not being played. Christian Gray has been very upfront and honest with Notre Dame. The complete opposite of a Maureen Walker, number 1. Number 2, Christian Gray never committed to Notre Dame. So that's the other thing that's completely different. And, I think there's a level of honesty with Christian Gray and his communication with the staff that did not exist with the Maureen Walker. And that was our complaint the whole time. Yeah. Every time we'd reach out to Notre Dame and say, hey, look, guys, look, here's what's going on. Here's what we're being told. It's like, no. He tells us it's all good. And it's like, okay. And then they, they did kind of get played a little bit. That's not the case with Christian Gray. Everything we've ever been told about Christian Gray is he has been upfront and honest with the Notre Dame staff about the schools he likes and where he's leaning and all that kind of stuff. He has a great relationship with the players in the class. They play games together. But he's never told them, I'm definitely coming, while he then goes and takes visits. They just have a great relationship. And so, I don't view those situations as the same. If anything, I'd say Notre Dame would be Michigan in this scenario. That if he picks LSU, I would never feel comfortable about that commitment as long as Notre Dame stays on him. So if anything, he's the opposite of a Maureen Walker in that I actually feel like Notre Dame is where his heart is, even if his head tells him to go somewhere else before that, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure if that made sense, but that's kind of how I look at it.
I know we got a couple in the chat that want. I don't know if you want to roll through those real quick, Brian. Somebody said Rico Flores. If we want to give a
That's let's go for that one. I mean, because we're kind of going through the board right now of guys that are that are going to visit. So what would yours be for Rico?
I guess I'd be at an 8. I mean, I feel like they're in a good spot, especially when in the final 3 there. I would say like I've just been very hesitant of going super high with it just because he hasn't been to campus before,
Mm-hmm.
Like what if he goes to campus and he just doesn't see himself there, man? Like it could happen very easily. So I'll say 8 because they may even be the leader right now, but I think things can change if the visit doesn't go well, obviously.
I'm at a 6 because for what you just said, but I also think that part of the reason he's trending to Notre Dame right now is because I don't think that Ohio State and Georgia are necessarily pushing as hard for him right now. Because especially Ohio State, if Ohio State called him and said, "Hey, dude, you have a spot. We love you. We want you," I think he would pick Ohio State.
I agree.
And Georgia, I'm uncertain of. I think I haven't been told if I've been. Some people have told me that he's not a take for Georgia. Others have said they think he is a take for Georgia. Georgia gets him last. We'll know that weekend if he's a take for Georgia or not. And I just feel like Notre Dame is a school he likes a lot, but I've always felt like Notre Dame was always sort of the consolation. That's 100% my read. He's never said that to anybody. It's just been my read that Notre Dame's a bit of the consolation prize a little bit with him. Now, sometimes, look, Notre Dame's landed some, and I'm not going to say who, but Notre Dame has landed some consolation prizes where they were his consolation prize, and those guys ended up being really good players. Mm-hmm. So once a kid commits, he tends to buy in, right? But it just may not mean that's ultimately where he wanted to go at the beginning of the process. So that's kind of why I'm not as because by June, Ohio State's gonna have a much better view of where they are with Noah Rogers and Brandon Ennis and guys like that. Cardinal Tate, Georgia's gonna have a much better sense of where they are with some of these guys, and that's going to determine where they push for Rico or not. Now I'll say this: I do feel like with what I know of Rico, if he does commit to Notre Dame, I won't be as concerned about him flipping as I would be with other kids who pick Notre Dame as a consolation prize. Because I do think the value of the Notre Dame academics, and I think from what I know of Rico, I think the fact that Notre Dame was the school that definitely said we want you and like you would mean a lot for him if they get to that point. But that's kind of where I'm at with him.
He definitely sees the value for what each school gives to him, right? Like he's a very understanding kid to like Notre Dame gives you a lot that's not just quantified by football. Like he gets that. He does to get that.
Ben Swineford said, is Notre Dame taking a serious look at the IMG linebacker? He's referring to Jordan Hall visiting with Samuel Mpemba, or is he just more of a tag along for Samuel's visit? This is an official visit for Jordan Hall. There's nothing tag along about an official visit like that. If it was an unofficial visit, I'd say, yeah, maybe. But no, Notre Dame is recruiting him. The reality is there are 3 linebackers on the board that Notre Dame likes a lot. Jaden Ausberry, Samuel Mpemba, and Darian Gillette. I think Notre Dame also realizes that Samuel Mpemba could project at a lot of different places. I think when you combine that with, because at the beginning we said we're probably going to take 3 linebackers is what Notre Dame's probably going to do. Well, that was before Josh Burnham moved to defensive end. So I think they're a much better place now to take a 4th linebacker. And so Jaden Ausberry, in my opinion, is the number 1 pure linebacker on the board. Samuel Mpemba is the number 1 athlete on the board. They want both of those guys. And then the next guy on the board that they love is Darian Gillette. Now, they're recruiting Jordan Hall. They like Jordan Hall, but I think, in my opinion, he is more of a let's get him up, right? Let's see how he fits. Let's see if he likes it. Let's size him up. You know, Al Golden was at IMG yesterday, so I think that was part of the process. It was seeing Mpemba, but also sizing Jordan Hall up. So I wouldn't say Notre Dame likes him as much as those other players because I think that they're earlier in the process with him than they are other players. Because sometimes another guy may be prioritized higher on your board more so because you just have a longer period of evaluation with him than you do another player. Jordan got an offer late. The evaluation has come late. I just don't think they're on the same stage with him. But from what I'm told, he's also taken a jump this spring as a player. I liked his junior film, Ryan. It was solid. He was like a top 250 kind of linebacker for me. I've seen a few spring clips from some workouts and some different things where his athleticism is popping more for me than it did as a junior. And so I'm really curious to kind of see how Notre Dame, because IMG sort of had like their spring game yesterday. It's actually an inter-squad scrimmage because no one will play them. and an inter-squad scrimmage is IMG players is still probably better than a scrimmage against anybody, just about anybody else. I'm really curious to see.
We got Bishop Sycamore.
Yeah, Bishop exactly. Sycamore. Smitty was down there yesterday there. He sent me a bunch of clips of Mpemba. I'm going to get with him about some Jordan Hall stuff, but Al Golden was there evaluating those guys. So I think if you start hearing more and more about Jordan Hall and Notre Dame, it's going to be because Al Golden got down there and got to see things that they haven't seen from him that they've seen from others because of the length of the process. So that's a long way of answering, Ryan. He's not a tag along for Samuel Mpemba. He's a legitimate target for them, in my opinion.
No, he is. I'm interested to see what he looks like as a senior, though, to your point, Brian, because that was one hesitation I had with him, is I thought he was a good player, but the fact of the matter is that you have Preston Zitters, who's pretty much a pure Mike in this recruiting class, right? And I just kind of see Jordan Hall as that guy, unless his athleticism is taking a big step forward, you know?
Your audio and mic just took a little bit of a nosedive there at the end of that question. So see if
Can you hear me now?
Better.
Is it better? It's better now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was just saying that the hesitation I had for Jordan Hall when the offer first came was that they already had now they have Preston Zinter that is a pure Mike in this recruiting class, and I just kind of see Jordan Hall as a Mike as well. So if he takes a big step athletically, maybe he could be a Mike Will type of dude, but right now it just seems like he's a little bit similar to where Preston Zinter fits into the defense for me.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I got to say I do really like him. And Mpemba's such an intriguing player. Brian sent me some videos yesterday of him, and he's so long and twitchy. He's still evolving as a player, but there's a couple snaps like I sent where he just runs right into the guy and just kind of pushes the guy back, and it's like, it's not really impressive. He's just big and strong and athletic. But then the next clip he sends me, he comes off the edge, he does like a little dip, and then just explodes past the guy, and you're like, okay, wow, that guy's got some serious ability. So there's a lot of talent there to work with. There's no question about that. Tom Creevy asks, is Daya Mccalla a possibility for Notre Dame? As of right now, Tom, I don't believe that's the case. As of right now, things can always change, but as of right now, I don't think that. I think this is about Daya finding the right school for him, and not so much, his recruitment is, I think, was about playing for his dad. Now I think it's about Daya finding the right place for him. And, maybe down the road that leads to Notre Dame, but I think right now it's more about just, finding the right thing and opening things up for him, in my opinion. Blaine Tiller asks, what does Scott Frost need to do at Nebraska to not get left at the tarmac at the end of the season? That's a great question. They are such a strange team last year, Blaine, because, and we've talked about this, I'm going to pull up their numbers from last year because it was really insane. They lost 9 games. They went 3-9 last year, which is a horrible record. But their biggest margin of defeat was 9 points to Ohio State in a game where they had the ball in the fourth quarter with a possession. It wasn't late in the game, but it was early in the fourth quarter. Late in the fourth quarter. It was early in the fourth quarter. It wasn't late in the fourth quarter. Where if they score, they take a lead over Ohio State, and then they didn't score, and Ohio State went down and scored to kind of pull it away as a 9-point win. But you look at Nebraska last year, they outscored their opponents by 63 points, I believe, if my math is correctly. You don't see teams go 3-9 and outscore their opponents by that many points. For example, Northwestern had the same exact record. Northwestern scored 199 points, and they gave up 358. They were outscored by, again, I'm hoping my math is correct here, but 149 points, whereas Nebraska outscored opponents. Illinois that year was 5-7 last year, a better record than Nebraska. They were outscored by their opponents by 21 points. If you look at other similar teams in the league, Rutgers went 5-8 last year, made a bowl game. They were outscored by 79 points. Again, I'm hoping my math is correct. Maryland went 7-6. They were outscored by 18 points. I mean, so you're looking at this, and you're like, Michigan State went 11-2 last year. They outscored their opponents by 71 plus 40, 85 points. Nebraska went 3-9 and outscored their opponents by 63 points, right? Because they had a couple blowouts. The point being, they had a chance to win almost every game they played last year. So I think that got him a bit of a reprieve and got him another year. So what does he have to do this year? I think he has to come close to flipping that. I don't know if 9-3 is a definite, but he's got to win at least 8 games. He's either got to go 8-4 with a bowl victory or 9-3. And because you look at their schedule, they got a lot of winnable games, Ryan. They play Northwestern and Ireland, start the year off. Northwestern stinks. They should win that game. Then they come home, they play North Dakota and Georgia Southern at home. You've got to win those games. What the first thing you can do to not get left at the tarmac, if he loses to one of those two teams, I think you almost got to fire him at that point in time. Then they've got Oklahoma at home. You've got to, maybe they win it. At least it's got to be competitive. Bye week, Indiana at home. You've got to at least be 4-1 to start the season. And if you can be at least 4-1, you've got a chance to be a decent team. They play at Rutgers and at Purdue next. Then they have another bye week because they're playing in that week 0 in Ireland. They're playing on August 27th in Ireland. So they have a second bye. Then you have Illinois at home, Minnesota at home, and then the season ends hard. It's at Michigan, home against Wisconsin, at Iowa. They almost beat every single one of those teams last year. So to me, that's a minimum 8-4 schedule right there. And if you can't go 8-4 against that schedule, then you're just not the guy. And so 8-4 with a bowl win, I think keeps him employed. 9-3 in the regular season, I think keeps him employed regardless of what happens in the bowl game, unless the bowl game is just some travesty where they just get obliterated by Memphis or UCF or something, right? But the other big thing is he's got to stop being an idiot away from the field. That's his big thing. You can't lose and act and do dumb things. And so he's got to clean up his own act, but then he's got to almost flip that record, Ryan. I don't know what your thoughts are on that subject.
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised Scott Frost still has his job, to be honest with you. I know you mentioned, he lost a lot of close games, so you can always make the argument of play here, play there, and record looks much different. I get that. Were you a fan of Scott Frost when he was hired by Nebraska?
Yeah,
I know he did a really good job. Yeah,
I thought that was a great hire. I thought it would take him a little bit more time. He did go 0-something his first year at UCF and eventually built them up. But I thought it was going to be great. He gets Nebraska and all that kind of stuff. And I think if he wasn't an idiot, his team has a lack of discipline. And if you know anything about what we're talking about, because I'm not going to air that dirty laundry publicly, but if you know what we're talking about, you'd say, well, no wonder his team lacks discipline, because he lacks discipline as a person, and everybody knows it. And so you can't act like an idiot as a head coach and then all of a sudden think your team is going to be disciplined, because they have literally fumbled away so many games the last couple of years they should have won. And you're because they play just like how he lives, so if he can get his head out of his what, I think he can win there. I do. I think Nebraska is one of those places where I actually do like the idea of an alum being the head coach there. In most places, I don't feel that way, but I think that's such a unique place. If you're going to win there, you almost need someone who truly understands what made them good for 60 years, and the walk-on program and all those type of things, I think has to be part of that. So I thought it was a great hire, Ryan. He hasn't held up his end of the bargain. I don't blame the people that hired him. I blame him for not acting like a grown-up, in my opinion, since he's been there. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Well, I think players still want to go play for Nebraska, right? It's not to the degree of a Notre Dame, obviously, the tradition, but there's a great tradition behind Nebraska football still. Right. Tom Osborne and all the great players that have come through there in the 90s. And so I still think that it's possible to win there. There just seems to be something missing with Coach Frost right now with him. And maybe it's like you said, the maturity factor, the stuff off the field. I don't know what it is, but they were in a lot of football games last year. You could easily make the argument that they should have been a much better team than they were on paper. So we'll see what happens. I don't know what to expect from them because, Adrian Martinez had a lot of flaws, right? He was a very flaw-driven quarterback, but now, who's the starting quarterback now that he transferred to Kansas State? I don't know who their starting quarterback is.
It's either going to be Casey Thompson or the Purdy kid from the transfer from Florida State, I believe. Casey Thompson from Texas, and then
Chubba Purdy.
Chubba Purdy are the two kids that transferred there. So I imagine, from what I've read, I think Casey Thompson has the edge.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing, to your point, though, Rand, they don't need Casey Thompson to play like Eric Crouch. They just need him to not. I don't know another way to say this. But stop pissing away games.
Yeah.
And that's what Adrian Martinez did. He would just but I put that back on Scott Frost because Adrian Martinez progressively got worse over 4 years. I mean, that's the thing is like that's on you. You kept throwing him out there, and he was as undisciplined as a player as you were as a person and as a coach. And so, their quarterback position should at least be okay this year.
I thought Martinez after his freshman year, I thought he was going to be the real deal in a couple years, man. He looked like he was really promising, but it's kind of like that program, man. You see a glimpse and then it just kind of goes backwards a little bit. 1 step forward, 2 steps back type of thing. But I mean, I hope for the best. It's like one of those things though, Brian, for me, we talked about it all the time. I think college football is better when Nebraska's good at football. So I'm going to be hoping that they're good.
We're going to have a show on that this summer, Ryan, because I think that's a great conversation. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think they're better. I think college football is better when Nebraska's good and in the Big 12. I'm just saying. Hulk Strongest, guys. Aloha from Hawaii. Same to you, buddy. What if Everett Golson was the quarterback on the 2017 team? Do you think we would win the Natty? Which version of Everett Golson are we getting?
Right.
That would be my question.
Mm-hmm. I still think it's that question. And then, I mean, it was just, there's some coaching issues, right, that are still involved in that situation. Like if you had a guy that I trusted to be with Everett that, could push the right buttons and that you had the confidence of like best confident version of Everett Golson, then yes, I believe, but I think there's no guarantees that that's what you're getting, obviously, in that situation.
If you got 2012 version of Everett, I'd feel a lot better about that than 2014 version of Everett. Because 2012 version of Everett would run. And I wanted a running quarterback on that team. But he was a much better passer than Brandon was by that. Even in 2012, he wasn't the passer or he was a better passer than what Brandon was, even in 2012. So I think they had a shot. They would have had a shot, in my opinion. Yes, they would have had a shot. Because in 2012, Everett, I mean, with all due respect to Miami 2017, they're not Oklahoma. They're not Oklahoma 2012. Plus by that point in time, Everett would have been like 25. So he'd have been very mature. I'm kidding. Kevin Carter with a good question, Ryan. Why does Ryan Day get more credit than Riley for how good of a coach he is? I feel they both inherited great programs, but haven't quite recruited to the same level as their predecessors. Do you have an immediate thought to that? Because I have a couple of thoughts on that.
Well, I've said it on this podcast before. I think Ryan Day's a little bit overrated, to be honest. I think he's a really good offensive mind. I think the comparisons that you can bring here with Lincoln Riley and Ryan Day is that they're both really good offensive minds in different ways. Obviously, they run different systems, but I mean, Ryan Day, we can have a long talk about all the flaws of Urban Meyer, right? But Urban Meyer didn't exactly leave the cupboard bare for Ryan Day, just like Coach Stoops did not leave the cupboard bare for Coach Riley. And I've seen a bunch of lists that have Ryan Day rated as a top 5 coach in college football. And I'm just like, I need to see a lot more, right? Like, I mean, to be a great college football coach, it's not just about calling an offense. You also have to build a program, right? Like you have to maintain and build upon what you've had already. So I've always struggled with Ryan Day a little bit. I think he's a good coach. I think he's a really good offensive mind, but I think they're both a little overhyped, but great offensive minds, no doubt.
I'm okay with Ryan Day as a top 5 coach because my answer is I always have the same reaction when somebody tells me Ryan Day is a top 5 coach. My initial reaction is always, what? But then they're like, well, name somebody that's better. And I'm like, yeah, I really can't. I mean, I think just that's where we are right now in college football is I don't know if I could name you 5 guys better than him. Here's the difference between Ryan Day and Lincoln Riley and why I would put Ryan Day over Lincoln Riley. They both walked into almost identical situations. They were both kind of offensive coaches on really good teams and then stepped in for Hall of Fame coaches. They both stepped into really talented rosters with talented quarterbacks on the roster that transferred in. Everything is the same. I think two things. Number one, Ohio State has played tougher competition. I think the Big Ten East is stronger than the Big 12. Number two, Ohio State's teams on the big stage have played significantly better in most instances than Lincoln Riley's teams have. His first playoff team in 2017, I felt was the best team in the country that year. And the reason they lost was his inability to get that team to play any kind of defense. It was not a high-scoring Georgia team, and they gave up 54 points. Now, granted, it went to overtime, but they gave up over 40 in regulation. And that's been his downfall. Number two, they got progressively worse. The next year with Kyler Murray, they lost by 11. And my thing is, like, you want to talk about Brian Kelly and all his flaws? If you give Brian Kelly Kyler Murray in 2018, Notre Dame wins the national championship. Just full stop. With all of the flaws that I constantly point out about Brian Kelly, you give him Kyler Murray with that Notre Dame team and that defense, they win a national championship. And Brian Kelly's got a statue, right? I mean, I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, but here's the second thing. The third time they made the playoff was the most embarrassing playoff loss the team has ever had. LSU legitimately could have scored over 80 points that game if they wanted to, maybe more. I mean, that was one of the most that was almost like disrespectful to the game how bad they got. It wasn't like ended up being like 63-28.
It was a video game, man. It was a video game day for LSU. They could do no wrong at that. They was crazy.
Right. I mean, it was a great offense, an incredibly well coached offense against a coach who puts zero value on defense.
Yep.
And I think Ryan Day has done a bad job of getting a good defense at Ohio State, but I don't think it's because he doesn't want one. I just don't think he's figured out how to do it yet.
Yeah.
But that game, it was 49-14 at halftime.
Didn't Burrow have like 7 touchdowns at half or 6?
It was insane. Yeah. He had 7 touchdown passes, and I do believe they were all – and he accounted for 8 touchdowns in that game. I believe, yes, that he had his rushing touchdown came in the third quarter. So all 7 touchdown passes were in the first half.
That's insane.
I mean, he had touchdown passes of 19, 8, 35, 42, 30, 62 and 2 yards in that game. Like, that's embarrassing. Ryan Day has not had – he had that kind of loss to Alabama. They got blown out by Alabama. But the reality is that came after they had just blown out Clemson. The other game that Ryan Day is coaching in the playoff, they took Clemson down to the wire. They were an interception in the end zone away from beating Clemson that year. So they've been competitive in most of their playoff games where Oklahoma has not. So to me, that's why I think Ryan Day is a better coach. And as I've said before, he has to play better. He has to play better teams on a consistent basis than we have seen from Lincoln Riley. And so that's, to me, why that's why I think Lincoln Riley isn't not very overrated. He's a great Ryan and I were talking about this earlier today off the air. He's a brilliant offensive mind. I mean, there is no question about that. I'll never take that away from him. Absolutely brilliant offensive mind. But we have zero evidence that he can build a team. And I always get nervous about coaches who, the further they get away from the great coach they inherited, the worse they get. Oklahoma only scored 39 points last year, which for them is a big drop-off. And that was including 76 points against Western Carolina, right? You take that away, and they're not that far from where Notre Dame was last year in scoring points. And that was the first team that he's had that was just about close to 100% his guys. No more Stoops holdovers and those kind of things. And so that always, again, his worst 2 teams are his most recent 2 teams. So you're not riding on the coattails of Bob Stoops as much anymore. They were at 36 points a game if you take out the 76 against Western Carolina. Notre Dame was over 35. They were basically Notre Dame's offense last year. Yet they're going to go to USC and be a top 4 team because they recruited basically the same kind of guys he had at Oklahoma. I mean, let's not act like Oklahoma didn't have a phenomenal receiving core last year. Marvin Mims doesn't suck. You know what I'm saying? And every good defense they played last year basically shut him down.
Mm-hmm.
So, and he had a way better offensive line he's going to have. So I think there is a lot more credit being given to Lincoln Riley than I think he's deserved. He can prove me wrong at USC. Sure, he can. But I would take Ryan Day. And plus, I know some may disagree with me, but I think Ryan Day is a better guy than Lincoln Riley. I talked to some people around Ohio State. he can be a dick to people, I've been told, that aren't part of the program. But I talk to people around that program. He cares about his kids. He does right by the kids. It forces his coaches to like, hey, let's make sure these kids are going to class. We want to make sure that they're getting an education, all that kind of stuff. And I respect that.
Yeah.
They're no Notre Dame and they spend their academic prowess. But the fact is, I do think he cares about his kids. And everything I've ever been told is that he cares about his kids. I think Lincoln Riley cares about Lincoln Riley. That's what I think Lincoln Riley cares about.
Agree.
And so that's why I would take Ryan Day over Lincoln Riley.
Western Carolina, you know their nickname, their team nickname?
Aren't they the Catamounts?
Catamounts. Good call.
Yeah.
Good call. That's it's so unique. Just awesome.
I don't even know what a catamount is.
I don't know either. But it's like the Chanticleers of Coastal Carolina. It's very unique, and I love it. I also know they're a
directional Carolina team's got some jacked up nicknames.
Yep.
JP Buellsfeld, do you think that CJ Williams is much less likely to get meaningful playing time for USC this year? Yeah. I don't think he's going to see the field.
Is he going to play? I mean, they have Kyle Ford is going to be a redshirt junior on that team and has barely played, and now he's got Mario Williams and all those dudes in front of him now.
Jordan Addison. Yeah, he's not going to play.
Yeah, no.
I really think part of the reason that they took him was insurance and to make sure he didn't go to Notre Dame. I think that's why they took him. Lincoln Riley staff. I think the previous staff really wanted CJ. I think the new staff just wanted to make sure Notre Dame didn't get him and just wanted him in case they couldn't get the transfers. But yeah, that's kind of my thought.
Because they still have a couple younger receivers that are coming back too on top of the transfers they got. So it's very unlikely that CJ gets much playing time this year.
Notre Dame 2164. How much does a quarterback being able to run the way Buckner does open up the passing game and the run game? Run game as in the running back run game. Well, the latter, Ryan, we've talked about before. And that is it's hard to account for a running back and the between the tackles runs when you also have to worry about the quarterback getting out on the perimeter. And if you want examples, go back and watch the 2017 season. Even though Notre Dame could barely throw the football that year, teams were you'd still see Josh Adams. I was like, why does Josh Adams run? I've had people, is the line that good that Josh Adams is constantly has these wide open holes and for like 70-yard touchdowns? And I'm like, well, yes and no. The line is elite, which allows him to get through that first level, but they're not down there blocking safeties 15 yards down the field, right? That's happening because the safeties are going this way and that way to try to defend Brandon Wimbush's ability to run the football. and so that's what turns 20-yard gains into 60-yard gains is when you have to count for that. You go look at the USC game. I've pointed this out before. And we played this on the show, but Josh Adams goes for an 80-yard touchdown. If you watch the play, the backside linebacker, the safety, and the overhang guy are all running towards Brandon Wimbush. And Josh Adams just goes, Alex Bars just takes the D tackle, throws him into the A gap. He cuts right behind Alex Bars, and then bam, he's off to the races.
You could also just watch last year when Tyler Buckner was in the game a whole lot. To be honest,
there you go. Even when you knew he was going to run the ball, it would still open up opportunities. So run game wise, absolutely makes sense. Pass game wise, it's a little different deal. And I would say yes and no, Ryan. And I want to get your thoughts on this. The no is that your passing game is going to thrive if you have a good passer at quarterback, period. Whether it makes it, does it open it up more? If you have a kid that can throw, absolutely, it does. But it doesn't do it automatically. And I think, again, 2017 is a great example because if your quarterback can't hit the open receivers, it doesn't really open anything up. Your quarterback's still got to be able to throw. I think it makes it, I would not say it makes it better, but I like the way he said it, Ryan. It does it open up the pass game. Mm-hmm. That I could say definitely. If the question was, does it make the pass game better? I'd say sort of, but there's a lot more to it than that. But when I think open up, I think it means, I take it as, and perhaps I'm wrong on this, I take that as you're going to hit more post routes over the top or deep drags over the top because the safeties are coming down to play the quarterback run. So maybe more big plays because the quarterback can run. That's how I took it, Ryan. I know we agree on the latter part. What are your thoughts on having a quarterback like Buckner opening up the passing game?
I think one of the biggest things that Buckner brings to you is that when an offense can dictate what type of coverage they're going to see, or they have some understanding of what they're going to see from a coverage perspective, it makes things a lot easier. And when you're a quarterback with the running ability that Tyler Buckner has, it's hard to play a lot of man-to-man coverage, man. Like if you're turning your back to a kid like that, he is just going to chew you up all day. So I think you're going to see a lot more. And I thought you saw it against Virginia Tech, honestly, Brian. Like the second half adjustment for me was like they said, like, we need to go to a lot more zone and kind of trap coverages and do all those types of things. But I think that helps you in a way because you can understand what's coming to you. It makes it a little more predictable from a defensive side. So I think that's what the running game from the quarterback or just running threat of the quarterback can bring to you is the fact that you're a defense, I think, gets a lot more predictable in that sense because there's just some things coverage-wise that you're not feeling really comfortable about doing. And then maybe we have to keep a linebacker in to spy, and that obviously takes a defender away from where typically he'd be in coverage. And I think you can just kind of predict what coverages are coming, if that makes sense.
Yep, agree. Marky Stewart, the super chat. Mark, thank you very much for that. He says, came on late. What's the latest on receiver recruiting? So, Ryan, all we're going to say about Rodney Gallagher right now is that things are trending in an opposite direction. Mm-hmm. And so just beyond Gallagher with things trending away, I believe Mark is a member of the message board, so you can check that out. But kind of where do things stand with the rest of the board in based on the latest? Because I know you've been talking to, even before the news last night, you had talked to Greathouse recently. We talked to Joshua Manning. We've been talking to a lot of these kids. So what is the latest with Notre Dame's receiver recruiting?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, obviously, with everything that's happening, Mark. And I'll say that I also have a piece that's going to be coming out on Irish Breakdown soon. I kind of went through a little bit of the wide receiver board just to, in case, obviously, things are trending away with Gallagher like it seems. There's guys that we still feel very good about that are on the board. I mean, Jayden Greathouse is one that Brian just said out of Westlake, Texas. I think, and if you were here earlier in the show, I think we both gave around an 8 as far as how confident we feel about that one. I think that they're in a great spot with him. And I think, honestly, out of what the board looks like, Brian, I don't know if you agree with this. I think you may, because we talked about it a little bit, but Jayden Greathouse may be the best slot receiver, maybe potentially on the board with the guys that are left, because a lot of them profile more to outside guys. And Greathouse also profiles to be an outside guy, but I think he has a skill set that could fit somewhat inside, at least on a small basis as a slot receiver. So he's a guy that's on the board. They feel really good about him. Mentioned in this article also, obviously you have Braylon James that's already committed out of Texas as well. But Ronan Hanafin is a guy that this Irish Breakdown staff has been a big fan of for a while now. He's out of Massachusetts. Long, athletic kid, 6'3", we've been told that he's been in the 4.4s as a 40-yard dash type of kid. So he's long and he's explosive. He's a guy that things felt really good where they were dating back to like January, March, even, first couple months of the year. And then the more he's kind of kept things open, he started to get interest from Ohio State, Alabama, Oklahoma, USC. Those offers started coming in. So don't feel as great about where that one is anymore, but I still think that Notre Dame is in a good spot with Ronan Hanafin. It's about, kind of reminding of why he was so high at the mid sometimes. I know on July 3rd, we're going to get some clarification, obviously, on Rico Flores Jr., who is out of Folsom High School in California. He's also scheduled to have his first visit to Notre Dame next month in June. He's a guy that I think could profile to a little bit in the slot, a little bit outside. He's just a really solid all-around player in general, in my opinion. I don't think there's any standout trait per se, but I think he catches the ball well, solid athlete, good route runner. There's just kind of check boxes with that. So those are the most likely guys. That's kind of what the board looks like as far as the guys that we feel good about where Notre Dame stands with them. And then I threw out a couple guys. We talk a lot about Tyler Williams. I think somebody asked a question about Tyler Williams somewhere in this chat out of Lakeland, Florida. Look, Tyler Williams is a really talented player. I think he's ultimately going to be a tough player to get out of SEC country. But right now, we've been told that there's some interest on his end. But until he makes his way up to Notre Dame, I can't jump on that bandwagon yet, man. I mean, I would love them to be in a good position with Tyler Williams because his upside is through the roof. But he's a player to monitor, but not a player that I feel great about right now. And the last guy that's super interesting I threw in there was Lee Summit wide receiver Joshua Manning. He's 6'3", 190, really good long jumper in track and field. He's over a 22-foot long jumper. So he's explosive. He's athletic. He brings a lot of the same qualities that I just talked about with Tyler Williams. He's long and explosive, not quite as fast as Tyler Williams. But I think there's tremendous upside there. So he's a guy to definitely keep an eye on, but he didn't get his offer until I think May. So he's a guy that hasn't been on the board for very long here, but Manning is a very talented player. So a couple sleepers there to keep an eye on. But ultimately, I think the first priorities in this class are Jayden Greathouse, Rico Flores, and trying to get back in good graces with Ronan Hanafin right now.
Agree. It's a good one. And I just had to bring this up. This was really funny. So, we have said before, we invite fans from other programs to come on our shows. We love it. Just be respectful. Don't be an idiot. And for the most part, that's always been the case. We've had some LSU fans come in here and act like knuckleheads, but we've had USC fans come in here be great. Alabama fan. We haven't seen him in a while, but Ladarius Martin used to come in here a lot. And now we've got Antoine Johnson, who is a Michigan fan. And Antoine, you're really messing things up because as my guy 99 Proud BK1 says, Antoine challenges my view of Michigan fans. Stop it, Antoine. I don't want to think Michigan fans can be level-headed, realistic, and intelligent because Antoine is providing some really good chat into there. So I just wanted to get that out there because, look, we like to talk ball here. And, if you're a fan of another program and you come in here and be respectful and talk ball, you don't have to agree with us. You can still think Michigan would beat Notre Dame every single time, but just talk ball. And that's what I love about Antoine is he comes in there and talks ball. And Ladarius is that way too, and we appreciate that very, very much. Alex Udell says, Brian and Vince, isn't it true that Dairy Queen is greater than Culver's? That is not true. I don't know who told you that. Whoever told you that is lying, Alex. That is not accurate or true at all.
I've never been to Culver's. Is it good?
Really good. I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think it's like with anything, you got to go to a place that's actually, has good management and they take care of their food and do all that stuff. But yes, when it's done right, I like it. The one thing I like more about Dairy Queen is I do like Dairy Queen's chicken nuggets. And I'm more of an ice cream cone guy. And so I think their ice cream cones are good, but just from a pure food standpoint, I think that Culver's is definitely better than Dairy Queen. There's no question about it. In my view, Shane O'Shea asked this question, Ryan. I'd be curious to get your thoughts, and then I'll share mine. After Saban leaves Alabama, do you think the program will remain one of the best? They were blue blood, but didn't have much success the 20 years before Saban. I would say the 15 years before Saban, because within the 20 years before he arrived in 2007, they had won a title. Gene Stallings won a title in, 92? Right? So they had won a title in that 20 years frame, and they had some really good teams during the Gene Stallings era. The two previous coaches, Mike Du Bois and Mike Shula, weren't good. And obviously they'd kind of fallen off a little bit at the end of Stallings compared to what they were at the beginning. But, they won a title in the 90s. Alabama did. Mm-hmm. And embarrassed the U in doing it, right? Now, it was the Dennis Erickson U, so it's a little different than, beating a Jimmy Johnson or Howard Schnellenberger U, but, they still won it. But his point is correct. The two previous coaches were essentially failures. So, Ryan, to Shane's question, if Saban leaves Bama, do you think they will remain one of the best programs?
It depends on who the next coach is. I mean, I need to have a little bit of clarification on who the next coach is. I mean, if you're bringing Mike Shula back, then no, it's not going to last too long. I think it could be one of those situations where it is a Ryan Day, Lincoln Riley thing that we just talked about, right? They're left in a good situation. Maybe they're good for a couple years after that, but eventually things are going to start to deteriorate a little bit or go in the opposite direction. But it really depends on who the next coach is. So it's hard to answer. I'll say it's going to be hard to stay up to the same standard that Coach Saban has obviously brought the team to in recent years. So I'll say they'll take a slight step back, most likely, dependent upon, who's the next head coach, regardless of who the next head coach is. But it's very dependent on who the next head coach is. So it's hard to say.
I would say he's correct in that answer. My answer would be no. They won't remain an elite program because, to your point, Ryan, I don't see a guy that's an up-and-coming coach or an established coach wanting that job. You don't ever want to be the guy that replaces the guy, right? Urban Meyer didn't replace Steve Spurrier. He replaced Ron Zook, right? Technically, Urban Meyer didn't replace Jim Tressel. He replaced Luke Fickell, right? Because there was that year in between. So I don't think you want to be the guy that replaces the guy if it's been a long-term thing. Like replacing Jimmy Johnson at Miami wasn't that big of a deal. Jimmy Johnson wasn't there that long, right? He was there 5-6 years at the most. And so you just don't want to be that guy that replaces the guy. And there's a lot of pressure there. And coaches make so much money at other schools that it's kind of like, do I really want that headache? Where, I can make $8 million a year there, but then I get fired in 3 years where I can make $3 or $4 million here and be here for 10 years or 10, 15 years. And it's not for everybody. I think they're going to have a really tough time replacing Saban because honestly, my thought is I don't think Saban's. I thought Saban was going to walk away the next title he won, and then he won a title in 2020, didn't walk away. So I don't know if he's going to leave anytime soon, and I just have a feeling that eventually they're going to start to kind of go down, and it's not going to be the same attractive program it was if he doesn't. Like if he doesn't walk away in the next 3-4 years, I don't think Alabama's going to be as good. And they're still going to be very good, but it's not quite as good. So I think that factors into it as well, but I just don't see them getting the kind of coaches. Look, people, Dabo, I don't see Dabo. If Dabo's not willing to get into the things that's happening right now at Clemson, you think he's going to come to Bama and do that? Heck no. And if he doesn't, the boosters will run him out of town, right? So I don't think they're going to remain that way because I don't think that they're going to get a coach who wants to replace Saban. That's my 2 cents. I could be wrong, and Ryan is correct. If they do hire that guy, then they'll keep winning. Because it has a lot of resources. Because the secret is, Ryan, it's like every great program has a chance to be great if you hire the right guy. And every program makes the wrong hires, and from time to time. Notre Dame's made some bad hires, and they've made some good hires. The good hires panned out, and the bad hires didn't. It's not rocket science, right? And Alabama tried to replace Gene Stallings with a former assistant. That doesn't work out a ton. A long-time assistant it doesn't often work out a ton. Sometimes it does. Worked out for Dabo, right? But it was actually pretty funny. I was watching an old Clemson game from like 2004, I think it was what it was. And I see Chancey Stuckey's getting talked to by Tommy Bowden on the bench because Chancey Stuckey was a player then. And right behind him is Dabo, who was the receivers coach. So it was kind of funny to see that. But yeah, it was pretty interesting. But that's my 2 cents. It's a good answer, Ryan. Tyler Evans, in your opinion, what state is it hard for Notre Dame to recruit kids from? I think to me the toughest state for Notre Dame to recruit volume is probably Florida and Ohio.
Okay.
I think you're not going to consistently beat Ohio State when they're good for most of the kids. You're going to get a kid or two, and that's what all you need to do. Get a couple, get a Liam Eichenberg and a Tommy Kramer in one class. Then a year or two later, you get another kid, and you get a Brennan Vernon. But you're just not going to go in there and beat them for Brennan Vernon and Malik Hartford and Josh Padilla, and you know what I mean? You're not going to go in there last year, beat them for CJ Hicks and, start naming off all the lines and Sonny Styles. And you're just not going to do that. Right. You're just not going to consistently do that. Most of the kids are going to go Ohio. What Notre Dame used to do is they'd get enough of those Catholic school kids. They could beat them for them and then, have enough to where you had an impact. I still think getting the high level kids from Florida is still very challenging. Consistently do it
because of the number of programs in the SEC country and also the quality of high school.
It's a little bit, yeah. I think it's about there's so many good programs close by. The Keon Keeleys don't come along very often, right? I mean, we're talking about Richard Young. You even said the kid sounds like a Notre Dame kid, but when was the last time Notre Dame signed 2 5-star kids from Florida in the same class, right? It's been a long time, I would imagine, if it's ever happened. So I think that's still a hard place. And it's a terrible education system. I mean, so many of those kids and there's a lot of high school coaches down there, not all, but there's enough to where it impacts that are there just to coach football. They don't really care about getting kids eligible or making sure kids are getting an education. Or if they do care about that, it's only to make sure they're eligible to play for them. Not necessarily, taking will I sit my stud running back because he didn't go to class this week because I have a bigger important message to send to him than just, can we win this game on Friday night with or without you? Of course we can. Mm-hmm. But I care more about you developing as a young man than I do about this. Well, okay, I do that and then I get fired, right? I mean, that's the reality of it.
Yep.
So I think that it's all those factors, Ryan. It's the weather. It's the so many schools that you'd have to think of, all the big time programs you have to bypass to go from Tampa, Florida to South Bend, Indiana. And so you're going to get those kids every now and then. Like they would have got Notre Dame would have got another Berkeley prep kid in the 2018 class if Harry Hiestand doesn't leave. Nicholas Pettit-Ferrer was going to sign with Notre Dame if Harry Hiestand doesn't leave. All right. So you can get those kids. You're just not going to do it consistently, and you're not going to do it in a volume standpoint. So I think that would be Texas, I would have added to that before, but I never felt Texas was hard for Notre Dame. They just didn't try in Notre Dame. Notre Dame didn't really try in Texas as much.
Do you think California might be a little tougher with the USC dynamic now, or not as much? No,
because they've always gotten kids out of it. I mean,
right.
When Charlie was at Notre Dame and USC was in its heyday, Notre Dame still went out there and beat them for kids. Beat him for Manti, who was from Hawaii. Beat him for Jimmy Clausen. Beat him for Dane Chris. Beat him for Sierra Wood. They beat him for plenty of West Coast kids. Not all of them were from California, to your point, but beat him for Ethan Johnson. So Notre Dame has always been able to go out to California. Now, I don't know if the dynamics are changing now compared to what they've been. That could be the case, but that'll make it interesting, Ryan. That's a really good question that based on history, I would say no, but I am very curious to see how the dynamics in California are changing because you've seen a lot of kids leave the state. That's why there's more kids in Arizona now. There's even more kids in Texas now. I think that factors into it as well. So I'm very curious to see how that plays out. And how does NIL factor into that? Because before it's like you just, it's about the education, and USC is actually a good school, but do I want to get away? Some kids may say, yeah, I love the West Coast. Other kids may, if you've been in California lately, it's like, yeah, I want to get away from this. It just depends on where a kid's coming from and what his likes and dislikes are. So I'm very curious how that plays out, Ryan. That's a very good question. I'm going to say no, with an asterisk of we haven't seen Notre Dame really hit California hard. I think the talent level in California is going way down compared to what it used to be. If you think about it, in the last NFL draft, California, I think, was third in total number of players produced, right? You've seen that graphic. Texas was number one with 32. Georgia was next with 30. California was third with 22, and then Florida had 30. I like to use the Electoral College as an example to kind of prove my point of kind of size. And if you look at the Electoral College from just 2020, right, the last presidential election, California had 55 electoral votes. Texas has 38. Florida has 20, 29. That's almost twice as many and the reason I point that out is because that's determined by population.
Sure.
California is a significantly bigger state than even Texas population-wise. Yet Texas continues to produce more and more and more kids than California because you're just not seeing as many big time. Can you name a single offensive lineman from California in this recruiting class?
No, I can't.
10 years ago, you'd have been able to name this kid, this kid, this kid, this kid, this kid. It would have been no problem.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's changed the dynamic of California as well.
That's weird. Yeah. I didn't. Wow. Yeah. I literally can't think of any right now. I don't think Mater Dei or St. John Bosco have anybody, right, in this class.
None in the 23 class. There's some younger kids.
Sure.
But I can't think of off the top of my head more than a one or two, maybe really good front seven guys in this class.
Yeah.
They're still doing the skill, but are those kids moving? Are they going to Utah? Are they going to Colorado? Are they going to Texas?
Going somewhere. Somewhere. Sure.
Connor O'Doherty says if they all wanted to come, would we, Notre Dame, take all three of Jeremiah Love, Jayden Lamar, and Richard Young?
I'd say yes. Yeah. Because I think that look, Lamar and Young are the true runners in that group, and then you give Love a chance to play it too, but he's also an athlete in case it doesn't work out. So, yeah.
That's right.
The question was yesterday or a few days ago after Richard Young made his after he set up his official visit, the question is, do you take Richard Young if it pushes it to three backs? And the answer is yes. Yes, you do. Mm-hmm. So you can think of it as Love and Lamar are the class, and then Richard Young is just too good to not say no to. Just think of it that way because he is. Make no mistake about it. Whether he ends up at Notre Dame or not, he is the best running back in this class, in my opinion. He is a special runner.
It's him or Cedric Baxter are the two for me. Those are the two for me. And it just depends on what type of back you're looking for. But, yeah, Richard Young's in that conversation. And it's a short conversation. I've had people there's a kid from Texas that I've had people mention to me as a guy that's in that conversation. For me, it's those two. It's those two for sure. There's no question about it. Rob Didoff says Brian, Vince, and Ryan. And when Ryan joins, Tony Rice is my all-time favorite player. Obviously, he would not be the starting quarterback in today's offensive schemes. What position today would he play based on his skills? I disagree with you, Rob, because if he was coming out today, there's a chance Notre Dame would be playing against Tony Rice because he'd be at Navy. Because he would be a sick triple option quarterback at Navy. Because he's a great runner, he makes great reads, and he's got a cannon for an arm. And that's exactly what they needed and they want in that offense. So I actually think he might still be playing the triple option or playing because he'd either be an Army or Navy, in my opinion, maybe even Army, because Jeff Monken's doing some really, really good things there. So, they have some of the same issues getting there, but they got into Notre Dame. But if he could have got in with the test score, I could see him running the option. But to respect your question, Ryan, what position do you think he would be playing in today's game if it wasn't at quarterback? I think it'd be catching passes.
Yeah, I would say he'd be a pretty damn good slot receiver in my opinion, right? Like that seems like he'd probably have the Avery Davis type of. I mean, he's a better athlete than Avery, but yeah, that would probably be his projection, right? Quarterback, turn, slot receiver, whatever. He's a gifted athlete, so get him in space type of player, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Here we go, Ryan. Antoine Porcher Rideau says, Brian, you and Ryan were talking about a school that Notre Dame hasn't played that'd be a good home and home to have with. I think Memphis would be a great one. He'd mentioned that in one of our comments the other day. I just don't know what Notre Dame gets out of playing Memphis.
Because I think if you group of five and all that stuff.
And I understand where he's coming from, but I think playing Tennessee, if you're interested, because I think part of Antoine's thing is what he said on the message board or on the chat from the show that we did on this. There's talent in Memphis, right? I don't know if there's a ton of it, but I don't know if playing against Memphis is as impactful for you against the best players in Memphis as playing in Tennessee would. That's just my sense because I don't see Memphis beating Tennessee for a lot of kids at Tennessee once if Tennessee's even decent. So, but I get the premise, and that's kind of where I'm coming from with my Tennessee rivalry. Mm-hmm. I just don't think Memphis does that for you. I mean, no one's going to care if Notre Dame played Memphis and beat them. It's a lose-lose for you if you're Notre Dame. If you lose to them, you're crushed. If you beat them, it's like, well, of course you did. They're Memphis, right? Which I think I think Memphis is a good football program, but still, you just don't get the same. You don't get to say boom for your
bang for your buck.
Bang for your buck. Boom for your buck. That doesn't sound right. That's not right.
Yeah. Tennessee's an interesting one because they're also one of the teams that are throwing out all the NIL money, right? So it'd be nice to have that matchup and show that doesn't matter fully, right? It's still about developing.
You can go there, get money, and then we're going to beat your brains in,
exactly,
and you're going to get picked lower than you would here. That money, because there's the thing you pitch. Like, look, we're producing kids at a higher level. The money you're going to make there compared to what you're going to make here is less than what your signing bonus difference is going to be if you come play for us.
Yeah,
I hope Notre Dame's having that conversation. Here's what our guys have made in the NFL draft the last 5-6 years. Here's what Tennessee guys have, because it is way more than a couple $1 million.
Yes.
It's in the tens of millions of dollars, if not more, when you look at the contracts that Notre Dame players have signed the last 10 years. I mean, there's been stretches where Tennessee's gone multiple drafts without a guy being picked. I mean, I'm right on that, right? Aren't I right? I'm pretty sure. I mean, I got all these great websites. That's one thing. The internet sucks in some ways, but in other ways, it's phenomenal because you can just quickly, things are just at the tip of your hand. Tennessee, yes, they didn't have a kid picked in 15 or 16. And then they didn't have a kid picked in 19. And this past year, they had 5. They've had 5, 6, but most years it's 2. Like in 2014, they had a kid picked in round 1. The next year were 6 and 6. 2021, they had 2 guys picked in 3 and 6, 2 and 7, 3, 6 and 6. It's not a ton of guys.
I'll say this off just completely off the cuff here. Memphis has some great uniforms though. So they are very visually.
Some of their combinations
I love them all, man. Those baby blues or the blacks, they're all nice.
It's the helmet for me. I love their uniforms or their helmets. I don't like the blue helmet, the Bengal stripes.
Oh, I kind of like it.
I'm a traditionalist, man. I like things I like the block M with the tiger on. I think that's really hot. I think the gray helmet, when they go gray helmet with the blue and the blue, I dig that.
I like the gray. I like the gray uniforms too.
Yeah.
I feel like I think they're sharp.
Now, see the gray. If I was going to go all gray, then I'd be okay going a blue helmet. But I'd still go. I'd just make the sticker gray with the tiger as opposed to the Bengal thing. I just don't. I don't like the Bengal stripes. I think the only way it works for me is with the actual Cincinnati Bengals because I think there's such a contrast in the black and the orange that it makes sense. I don't think gray and blue contrast enough, or white and blue contrast enough to really make that make a lot of sense to me.
It's fair. It's fair.
Yeah. Yep. Good question, Antoine. 99 problems, BK1. Without Gallagher, what does a realistic dream for receiver class look like now? On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you in each one? So we've already kind of done the confidence level. Just let's talk about what the 4 would be.
I mean, the realistic class, I would say, is Braylon James, Jayden Greathouse, Ronan Hanafin, and Rico Flores now. That's what I would say is the realistic class. The dream class is that Tyler Williams is somewhere in that conversation somehow. And we don't know if that's a plausible thing or not, but if you can get in with a guy like a Tyler Williams or even I would really consider Joshua Manning in this class, to be honest with you. So, but right now I would say realistic is James, Greathouse, Flores, and Hanafin. I think makes a lot of sense.
Here's an interesting one, Ryan, that I'll pose to you. Would you agree with me that Rico Flores has the higher floor than Joshua Manning?
Yes.
Would you also agree with me that Joshua Manning has a higher ceiling than Rico Flores?
Much higher ceiling.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're on the same page then. No doubt about it. That's why I think you almost kind of have to take Rico Flores because you need at least 1 or 2 guys in this class that can help you out as a freshman, whether it's to just push their way into the field or to just if an injury happens, something like that, right?
Right.
So I definitely think that there's a need for that, but that's the reason I really like Joshua Manning because I think Joshua Manning's a kid with a very high ceiling. So he
returns kicks for them too, man. He can scoot a little bit. Yep, he's interesting.
No doubt. I just wanted to share something. I just got a message. Somebody wants to kill some rumors. Apparently, there's some rumors that Braylon James is going to be taking more visits. I just got a message from somebody that would know that said that's not happening, and he is not. He's not 100% solid to Notre Dame. He is 110% solid to Notre Dame. So I just want to make sure that if there are any rumors out there about that, any clickbait stuff, I want to let y'all know that is nothing to put any stock in. I haven't heard that yet, but it doesn't surprise me because there's a lot of clickbait stuff out there going on. Irish Mail. If the big programs break away and form a super league, does Notre Dame get an invite? And if so, what are the chances they accept? The first part is a no-brainer. Yes, there's no doubt. Will they accept the invite? I think it depends on – I think yes. I think Father Jenkins said some things, but I don't think Father Jenkins is going to be at Notre Dame when that decision gets made. I don't see any way in which Notre Dame walks away from big-time college football. I just there's too many boosters and board members and people with positions of power that would say you're not going to commit financial suicide for this institution. You know, I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit too strong, but Notre Dame depends a lot on, especially from an athletic standpoint, on the money that the football program generates. And if Notre Dame is all of a sudden playing nothing but group of 5 schools, I don't think that continues. The TV deal's gone, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that would change, in my opinion. And I just don't see them doing that. It's a nice threat, and I wouldn't mind them using it to say, hey, look, we're going to make sure we do some things right. But as long as it's not a direct pay-for-play situation, then I think Notre Dame joins. I think that's the big concern that Notre Dame has is the pay-for-play thing. I think it's problematic. Gabe Wee says Notre Dame winning against USC this year is up to Harry Hiestand and now Washington, in my opinion. I'd say it's a little bit more complicated than that, but yeah, that's where it starts. I mean, that's kind of like the conversation we had yesterday, Ryan. If Notre Dame's going to win that game, they're going to have to play very well in the trenches. There's no doubt.
That's where your clear advantage is, right? Like that's where, well, I shouldn't say that is where your biggest advantage is, without a doubt, is in the trenches. So yeah, that's where I think that's one of those things like everyone talks about. Well, Quentin Nelson against USC a few years ago, right? Like everyone kind of gets flashes of that. Like that's what this situation has to be, in my opinion. You have to get them to tap out, and I think that's the best, clearest way to getting there is to get a Quentin Nelson versus Rasheem Green again.
Yep. All right, let's get down to some more here. Okay, Connor O'Doherty. Who do you guys think is Notre Dame's biggest rival? I will always see a lot of debate on social media, and I personally think it's USC with no question. What would the debate be? Who else would it be? Michigan?
People would say Michigan.
I don't even play Michigan.
Yeah, anymore right now. Yeah.
Like, and even, I mean, they went decades without playing Michigan because Michigan didn't want to play them. So and I know I'm in the minority on this. I don't view Michigan as a rival of Notre Dame's. And I grew up with it being a rival. I don't think it's been a rivalry for a long time. Just because maybe that's my disdain for Michigan, but I always valued the Michigan State game more than the Michigan game from a rivalry standpoint. Now, the Michigan games always had much bigger, like the Michigan game was always big to me because growing up, because Michigan was always good. And beating them always gave you a good win and a chance to play for a title, right? And then losing to them, obviously would hurt. But as far as just a rival, because a rivalry to me is not just a hatred. I think there's got to be some level of respect involved, at least from a Notre Dame standpoint. And Michigan State has always had Notre Dame's back. And when Notre Dame was trying to make runs and join the Big Ten way back in the day, Michigan State was one of the team, the non-anti-Catholic programs that tried to help Notre Dame get involved. And if you know Michigan's history from a anti-Catholic and race standpoint, you may not be a big Michigan fan, if we're just going to be honest about that. But I would say Navy and Michigan. I mean, Navy and USC are Notre Dame's biggest rivals, in my opinion. I don't view Michigan as a rival. When was the last? They played 19 and 18, and then before that, it was 14,
something like that.
I don't view it. And I like what Chief Brody said. I really hate Michigan. That's all. Love the show. Agree with you completely.
I agree. Yeah. I completely agree with you in the sense that like it has to, for a rivalry, it has to be a consistent thing, right? Like continuous, and it hasn't been continuous in Michigan. I will say though, that is definitely my most hated team that Notre Dame plays, but it's not the biggest rivalry anymore. It's just not.
Right. Yeah. That I agree with Ryan. That we agree wholeheartedly. I don't dislike anyone more than I dislike Michigan. And Antoine, I'm not gonna lie, Antoine is jacking up my little bit because I've always kind of joked on here and made fun of Michigan fans because I've never met an intelligent Michigan fan. But Antoine is kind of messing that up for us. So he is kind of messing up our flow. Speaking of Antoine, he has a question that I think a lot of non-Notre Dame fans come at me with this a lot. And so we'll address it. I have a question. So do the new scheduling situation that's coming up, do you think this will squeeze Notre Dame into joining a conference? I don't. The only thing that could, in my opinion, force Notre Dame into a conference beyond just absurd amounts of money. Like Notre Dame's getting $15 million from the TV deal and every other school's getting like 60, 70, and 80 million, which is to me a bit of a ways away. Because that would require Notre Dame to go down and those programs to go way, way up. It is if the conferences just started having like 10, 11 game conference schedules and every team could only have like one non-conference or two non-conference games. I think that would be the only thing that could remotely even get Notre Dame to consider that. But even then, you'd still have some teams that'd be willing to play Notre Dame. There's a lot of Power 5 teams that aren't big-time programs that would be dying to play Notre Dame to get money in a home and home and exposure, not just money, but exposure. So even then, I still think Notre Dame would take a lot. I don't think. Like, I think there's a thought of non-Notre Dame fans, like there's something people can do to squeeze Notre Dame to a conference. And I think the COVID year should have pretty much squashed all of that because there were multiple conferences that reached out to Notre Dame saying, hey, come play with us. Look, Notre Dame's still – a lot of non-Notre Dame fans don't want to hear this. But there's a reason why it was NCAA and Notre Dame as the two logos on NCAA football back in the day. Notre Dame is still very much a power broker in college football because what they don't realize is you don't have to be a great program to be a power broker because power brokers are the people that wield the dollars. And Notre Dame still very much throws a lot of weight around financially. And that's just always going to be true, in my opinion. So I don't think that like, did you remember, Ryan, when the ACC brought Michigan in or Notre Dame in and like people like David Cutcliffe and Pat Narduzzi were whining and crying about it. And the national media was like, they should tell Notre Dame to pound sand. Yeah, they should sacrifice millions of dollars in getting a chance to have Notre Dame in their conference and all that brings. So to help your ego and anti-Notre Dame stance, like that's dumb, right? But that showed that, look, there's a ton of people that would love to play them. So I just don't see that. I think it would just have to be where there's just no room to schedule non-conferences would be the only thing that could really impact that, Ryan, in my opinion.
It's so weird that the anti-Notre Dame people out there, man. It's like Notre Dame hasn't even been like super relevant from a championship perspective in a while, and they still hate Notre Dame for whatever reason. It's really weird. And hate is a strong word. I dislike the conference talk, to be honest, because I just think that there's way more positives to being independent than being in a conference for Notre Dame. I just think there's way more. And I always hear people that are not, anti-Notre Dame people that are like, oh, you make them join a conference, make them. We need to make them. You don't have that power. Like that's their decision. So
they don't really understand how powerful Notre Dame is. I think that's the problem. And they think, they haven't been relevant on the field as a title contender in a long time. So why does that? Then no one should care. It's not about that. It's still about the dollar, and it's still about exposure. And that's why every year that Notre Dame is good and they play a big time game, it's always like one of the two most watched games because you've got all the people that want to watch that game to hate Notre Dame. And that makes them money. Your hatred makes them money, makes ESPN money, it makes NBC money, it makes Notre Dame money. And you don't have the power to force Notre Dame to do anything Notre Dame doesn't want to do, right? I mean, you're so far away from that. Like I said, the only thing that could change that is the money gets so absurd that Notre Dame just can't afford to say no to it. Or as far as being forced, or that, like I said, the scheduling is such that they just can't afford. The team like, hey, we're going to go to a 11+1 schedule, or we're getting rid of the 12th games because we're going to have a conference championship, so we're going 10+1. I think that would be the only thing if all the Power 5 conferences adopted that. That would be the only thing that could remotely start pushing, in my opinion, pushing Notre Dame into that. Would be my thoughts on that, Ryan.
Yep.
Very good question, Antoine.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a good one from 99 Problems of BK1. If Notre Dame got both Micah Tease and Micah Bell, who would be the better receiver, especially in terms of fit with respect to the rest of the anticipated 2023 receiver class? Bell with the speed is intriguing to me.
It's a interesting comparison because Micah Bell plays running back for his high school, right? So you don't see him do too much in the passing game. Micah Tease is the one that is the wide receiver in his offense. So naturally, like I'd be more satisfied with the projection for Micah Tease just because I've seen him do it. I agree though. 99 Problems. Like I would love to see Micah Bell as a slot option with that speed. Like I think that's a really imposing proposition, but I just really haven't seen him catch the ball much, so it's kind of a tougher projection. So I say out of those two, Micah Bell, if one of them had to play offense, which we'll see what happens, I would say Micah Bell stays a corner and Micah Tease is the slot, in my opinion.
I like Micah Tease. I mean, I'm with you, Ryan. The speed intrigues me, but I think he's more of a running back. We haven't seen him play receiver. I think Mike is a natural receiver. I think he's got higher upside on defense. I think think about Micah Tease. He's a really smart football player on both sides of the ball. So he can play a lot of different positions. And I think Micah Bell can too. I'm not saying he's not smart. I'm just focusing on Micah Tease. He just has instincts on both sides of the ball. I just think his size speed combination fits better on defense, whether it's as a corner, a slot, a safety, wherever. I just think he's a natural corner, and he does everything he does on defense is just natural instinct and talent. He's not as coached up as well on that side of the ball as he is on offense. So I think he would be a kid that could make a quick transition to offense. I just think his ceiling is higher than the others. I think both of their ceilings are higher on defense for different reasons. Micah Bell, just because, a 5'11" kid that can run that fast, that's as skinny as he is not a running back. Right. Maybe he could be a receiver, but I just think a kid like that is a real, because he's a kid that if the technique and the instincts are ever able to match the speed, he's an elite player. Mm-hmm. And you just don't have kids. There's so many kids nowadays that do want to play offense that you're not getting as many kids like that at corner, which is why I think corners become such a premium position in the NFL draft, in my opinion. And one of these days I'm going to have to get Ryan's take on that, because I think that would be very, very, very interesting. No question. All right, here we go. So somebody gave some context on that. Irish Natty within 3 years. The Braylon James rumors are from butthurt Texas fans. I've seen a lot of Greathouses coming to UT, and the Braylon James recruitment is not over yet. I'll just say this. So yeah, that would make a lot of sense. That wouldn't surprise me at all. But he's I don't think either one of those things are true. All right, let's get down to some more questions here. D Troll Hunter. Sorry, did we get to my not recruiting but mailbag question? Who wins in a pickup game of Ryan and Vince or Brian and Sean? Football, basketball, baseball. Oh my gosh. Baseball, that's me. Football, that's me. Basketball, I've never seen any of those guys play basketball. I would not win because I couldn't make it to a game of 5. I'm so out of shape. I don't think I could last for a game of 5, but I don't know. I don't know if Sean has game. I don't know if Vince has game. I've never seen those guys play basketball. So I can't answer that one. Jay Henry, who's faster, Jeremiah Love or Micah Bell? Micah Bell, track-wise, is faster. I would argue he's also more explosive on the field, but I think Jeremiah Love is still an ascending player that will continue to get better and play faster and those kind of things. So we'll see how that one pans out. 99 Props BK1 says, I know you said that they are somewhat similar prospects, but how would you compare and contrast Tyler Williams and Joshua Manning traits, ceiling, floor?
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, for me, I think Tyler Williams has a higher ceiling and a higher floor. I think he's just a significantly better player in just about every regard. I do think similarly, they are similar style of players, though. I do agree with that. So traits, very similar. Ceiling and floor, to me, both higher for Tyler Williams.
Yeah, I mean, so I think of it this way, right? Tyler Williams is about 6'3", 185 pounds. Joshua Manning's about 6'3", 190 pounds. So they're basically the same size. They have similar length. They're both explosive football players. They both have speed as well. I think Tyler, just everything about his speed, explosiveness is just like a click higher than a guy like a Joshua Manning. So I think he's just a little bit of a higher quality athlete than him, to be honest with you. And the one thing that we don't talk enough about with Tyler Williams is Tyler Williams hasn't been playing wide receiver very long, right? Like, he's a kid that was playing quarterback. So he's still learning the position, which gives you even more like, wow, how good can this kid be? So I think stylistically they're very similar because they're long, athletic kids who have speed to burn. But I think Tyler Williams is just maybe just a cut above as far as an athlete.
Yeah, no doubt. I love this. Michael Parks, chicken wings, Mountain Dew, and Irish breakdown on a sunny day. Don't get much better than this. I'm actually going to be having the same thing. We're not having a sunny day, but I got, so my birthday was it last week now? Yeah, it was last week. And I got, signed up for those different clubs. And so I had some free chicken wings. So I got some last night when I was out running errands. I had to go buy a new lawnmower, and I had to go to the Midwest Gun Exchange to get some things there, and had to go pick up some stuff from Angela. So I stopped, got us dinner. I got her favorite Chinese place, and I got some free buffalo wings. So I'm going to have those. Had half of them last night, and I have some more today. So, and of course, I'm always going to be drinking Mountain Dew. So, Michael, we're going to be sharing similar meal today, buddy. There's no doubt. I'm sharing similar meal. Blaine Tiller thinks Tony Rice would still be a quarterback. And I think the premise would be because if he was growing up in today's game, and I think this is a very, very fair point. If he was growing up in today's game, he'd have been throwing from the time he was 8 years old. He'd have been at camps. He'd have been 7-on-7s. Like, he would have developed better as a passer because he had a great arm. But, growing up, he was an option quarterback his whole life. So I think that's a very fair point, and I've heard this mentioned before. And I've made this argument with, like, when people try to say, well, so-and-so is better than John Elway. And I'm like, based on what? And they're like, well, look at the numbers. And I'm like, well, that's a silly argument. Like, like, it's a different era. It's a different game. Right. And what would John Elway do if in today's era of the game? And it's just, so it's a really fair point, Blaine. And I think it deserves some thought and conversation, because I do think that was, I think the premise, how I took the premise of the question, however, was more of like the version that we got at Notre Dame. What is that guy playing? Right. To me, you're taking it in a much deeper way, which I think is a really good conversation, but less provable for me because we know what Tony was. I think you can make a theoretical case that if he grew up in today's, and I've said this about basketball players too, right? Is like, if basketball play, like, oh, this guy's better than that guy. Why? Well, look how well he shoots threes. Well, if Michael Jordan grew up in the same era that Steph Curry grew up in, he'd be shooting a lot of three-pointers. He grew up in an era where when Michael was really young, there wasn't a three-point line. The 3-point line didn't come to the NBA to like what, 79, 80, somewhere like around there, right?
Something like that,
yeah. So like same thing with Larry Bird. When Larry Bird was growing up, the 3-pointer wasn't a thing. So is this a different era? When you grow up and the threes are what they are, of course you're going to learn to shoot 3-pointers. Just the game has changed. But if Michael Jordan was growing up and he was a 25-year-old now, he'd have grown up shooting 3-pointers his whole life. And guess what? Michael Jordan could have been good at anything he did on a basketball court, right? And that's the thing is you look at how his game changed. You look at what Michael Jordan was for the second 3 titles, and you look at what Michael Jordan was in the 80s, completely different player. Why? Because his game changed. It evolved with the time, and as he matured as a player. So I would say that there's merit to that. That's, I think, big picture. I think there's merit to what Blaine is saying, Ryan.
Do you remember how big was Tony Rice? Do you remember like size?
Like 6'2".
Oh,
yeah,
so
I think he was like 6'2". Yeah, I think so. I'll have to look, but yeah, he was a good sized guy. I'm gonna have to look that up. I mean,
there's no reason then if he's a kid that has a strong arm, and you would assume that he'd grow up in a different way as far as throwing more consistently, maybe working with quarterback coaches, all that type of stuff. If he's 6'2", good athlete, and has an arm, there's no reason to think that he can't in this era now, right? I mean, what would be the difference between him and a guy like a Lamar Jackson or Deshaun Watson or somebody like that? I mean, he's a bigger athlete. So yeah, I don't see I don't see like what would be the setback to him playing quarterback or not in today's era.
I'm actually looking that up. I actually have a book here that has the 1988 Notre Dame season. And so I'm trying to look up the roster and to see what Tony's height was, but I believe he was 6'2", but I don't want to be inaccurate on that. So he was listed at 6'1", 198 on the 1988 roster.
So big enough.
So close. Yeah. Close. All right. Antoine trying to get back on my good graces. Elway could run, and he had the strongest arm I've ever seen. Antoine, I don't know if you've heard this because you're still someone new to our channel, but I grew up a big John Elway fan. So that's a comment I agree with.
Serious question, though. Do you think it's a close comparison between him and Josh Allen as far as just arm strength? Because Allen is probably the strongest I've ever seen in person. Yeah.
I think John Elway had a stronger arm 25 and in. Josh is the closest thing I've seen to it. I said Pat Mahomes is the closest thing I've seen to John Elway, but Pat's not the athlete John Elway was.
No, he's a good athlete. He's not a great
athlete. Last 2 years of Josh Allen is the closest I've seen. But Pat was the closest I've seen to John Elway. But they were different types of players. Patrick's more of a pocket guy. John Elway was more of an athlete during his career. I think Josh Allen's very comparable to John Elway in style of play. Now, John was a more advanced. I think maybe it had to come out of college more advanced. I mean, John Elway had set the path. This is the funny thing is I'm trying to look John Elway's career stats, right? I'm trying to just let me look this up. John Elway college stats. He in his career passed at Stanford in 4 years at Stanford, passed for 9,349 yards. He ended his career at Stanford as the all-time leader in the Pac-12 in passing yards. He only went over 3,000 yards once. It was a different era, right? But he was a more advanced player. He just played in a crap system with the Broncos. He would have been a much more effective passer had he played in a better system. But I think the powerful arm plus the combination of John Elway was a legitimate runner. He wasn't just he could run. One of the best things ESPN ever did, and they've done some great. The one thing I always praise ESPN for is the documentaries, the shows on historical things, the 30 for 30s. But the 1983 draft show they did it's called, I think, From Elway to Marino, was one of the best things I've ever done. Now, part of that is my bias towards John Elway, but it's great history. One of the things they talk about is people have always said John Elway wasn't really going to go play baseball. And everybody's like, no, actually he was. John Elway played one summer in the New York Yankees A League, and he batted 400. I mean, he was a great baseball player. And the Yankees genuinely wanted him. He was an elite athlete. And what a lot of people, see the older John Elway he was an older John Elway that had multiple knee surgeries, right? Because of all the running. But he was a dynamic athlete. And I think Josh Allen is the closest thing ever, where it could be 3rd and 9 and you've got to be worried about him breaking it. I mean, there were times I've seen John Elway step up, break a tackle, and then take off running and convert a 3rd and 9 with his legs. And then, 2 minutes left, and he does the same thing. He steps, take off running, and then you come up, and then it dumps it over your head. I think of the game where they beat the Oilers in the playoffs, where he starts to scramble early on the drive, and he takes off running, and he just dips out of bounds right at the first down marker. And then the same thing happens. I don't know if it was the next series or if it was like another play. And the Oilers came up and he just dumps it over their head. Vance Johnson catches it wide open, runs for like 30, 40 yards and sets up a David Treadwell field goal. And they beat the Oilers and Warren Moon in the playoffs, right? Like you couldn't, there weren't answers for him other than just your team had to be way better than his team, which is what happened in the Super Bowls all those years. You know what I mean? And so I think Josh Allen's like that, because to me, a great quarterback has to be a guy that can put a team on his shoulders and say, I'm going to make everybody around me better. And I think that's what separates like Patrick Mahomes, and that's what separates the Josh Allens, is they can do that. And John Elway could do that. And I think some other great, and I don't want to say names, but I think some other great quarterbacks that people view as contemporaries of John Elway, I think put up great numbers, but didn't necessarily make everybody around them better from a winning standpoint. That's just my stance on that. So it's a very interesting take for sure. But you get me talking about John Elway, we may go another hour.
You need to start a John Elway podcast.
There you go. It'd be a little weird and creepy. But I'm not gonna lie, like, you know me, Ryan, I don't do like the fanboy thing. But yes, when I covered the NFL draft in 2020 drafts, it was like right before COVID hit. There's no doubt I have a picture of me at the draft with John Elway behind me in the podium, so you could see me like there at John Elway's thing. And I remember I asked him a question, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then I was walking around the corner, and he walked around the corner, and I was about to bump into him. He's oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, like real politely. And I was like, called my dad. I was like, John Elway just talked to me. So that was pretty cool. That was one of the few times I get into like that little fanboy, like, oh my gosh, John Elway just talked to me. I just walked by John Elway. It was pretty cool. I was pretty fired up about that. Met Brady Quinn for the first time that weekend as well. Really nice, really polite guy.
Did you call your dad about that one too?
No. Nope. I called my wife because she likes Brady Quinn. I don't know why. I'm not sure why my wife likes Brady Quinn. We named our first dog after Brady Quinn. I'm not sure. I don't know what that is, I said sarcastically. Chad Delpreet, I'd like to see Notre Dame play one game per year inside the state of Georgia. I don't care if it's versus Georgia, Georgia Tech, or if they use their ACC connections to get a Chick-fil-A kickoff game. That's actually something I don't know if I do it every year, but like, over a 10-year period, like play 4 or 5 games in the state of Georgia. I think there's, Chad, I kind of like that. Because again, it doesn't have to be Georgia or Georgia Tech. It could be them sometimes. Maybe you play, you schedule a game against, Florida and you play it in Atlanta, or you schedule an SEC opponent and you're going to play it in Atlanta, or an ACC team and play it in Atlanta. That'd be very interesting. Or maybe that's something you could work out with the ACC. Hey, look, let's convert one, let's add an ACC game every couple of years in Atlanta where, one of your teams comes down and plays us, because that'd be good for the ACC too. Get to play Notre Dame in Georgia where they're all trying to recruit. Mm-hmm. That's very interesting, Chad. I dig that. Yeah. I dig that, Ryan.
It's a cool idea. I like it too. I think just using a neutral site location in SEC country just in general kind of intrigues me, to be honest. I think that's very interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. That's because that could just be a location. It doesn't even have to be against the same opponent, like you're saying, each and every year, right? Like you can use that just to your advantage in that way.
Yep, no doubt. I love this comment from Antoine. He says, John Elway was a modern quarterback before modern quarterbacks even existed. Everything these guys are doing now, Elway did it back then. Hey, and look, we've gone through a stretch of – there was a long period of time where, like, all these great quarterbacks in college were wearing number 7. I mean, I'm not saying I was a great quarterback, but, I mean, I had that same sentiment. But, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to that. There's a lot to that. And by modern quarterback, I think he's referring to the Josh Allens, the Patrick Mahomeses, the Lamar Jacksons, the Justin Herberts, not the Aaron Rodgerses, the Tom Brady's. That it's like
trade C quarterbacks. Yeah,
right. Like there's an era where like everybody wanted that pocket Tom Brady-ish quarterback and Aaron Rodgers, and now it's like, man, but if you have a quarterback that can do some of these things and move around and make plays with his legs, boy, that brings so much more value. Like, yeah, okay, we saw that a lot out in Mile High back in the 80s and 90s. I'm just saying, so I think he's pointing like. But that's why I say football is cyclical, right? Like it always comes around, and then in 20 years, 15 years, going to be back to you want the pocket passer because the game is going to have changed in some way, rules wise or whatever the case may be, to get to that point. So,
100%.
Chad also had a great comment. He says Michigan is the enemy, USC is the rival. There's a big difference. I think, like in a serious comment, I think that would be true of Michigan's side too. I don't know if Michigan fans necessarily view Notre Dame as a rival, and if they do, it's their third. It's behind Ohio State and Michigan State. It's more of Ohio State's their rival. They may hate them, but Notre Dame's an enemy. You just despise everything about them. Same thing for Notre Dame feeling about Michigan. There's no doubt about it. Lucas Chapman asks, do you think Utah would be a good replacement for USC?
What, to play it on a year-to-year basis?
As a relatively regular, yeah. I don't think so.
No, not a regular. I wouldn't mind playing Utah every once in a while. I respect their program. It's a good program, so I wouldn't mind playing them every once in a blue moon, but not a regular thing.
I kind of like playing teams that or not playing teams that you're undefeated against. You know what I mean? So, I think they're 1-0 against Utah, right?
Are they? That's interesting.
I think so.
I can't remember them ever playing Utah.
2010.
2010.
Yeah, that was they were 4-5 at the time. Utah came in ranked. They just lost to they had just lost to I think TCU, because remember they were both in the Mountain West at the time.
Yep.
It was the game Harrison Smith made one of the sickest picks I've seen at Notre Dame guy make that game. They won like 28-10 or something like that. I forget what the final score was, but yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep, it was 2010. It was one of Tommy Rees's first starts. Matter of fact, It was I think it was right after. It might have been his first start. Now that I think about it, because he came in. Dane got hurt against Tulsa, and I'm going to look this up because I think that was Tommy's first. It was only his first or second start. Just give me a second. It was Tommy's first start. It was the first career start for Tommy Rees. 28-3 was the score because Dane. It was 2 weeks before because they had a bye week after Tulsa. If you remember, Dane Chris got hurt against Tulsa. And they lost that game. That dropped Notre Dame to 4-5, and their season was not looking good. They played Utah, who at the time was ranked like 15th, and Notre Dame beat them. And like they had a blocked punt, they returned for a touchdown. I think Robert Blant had a big pick that game. But Harrison Smith, they were running a deep drag route, and Harrison Smith was in trail position. And when the ball was thrown, he went from behind the guy to cut the guy off and pick the guy out. It was like, oh my gosh, that's a ridiculous interception. But yeah, that was. I remember that game. And I'll say something else. There was a lot of Utah fans at that game. That was one of the nicest, classiest group of fans that ever visit Notre Dame's campus. They were so polite. They were like joining Notre Dame tailgates and having fun and talking ball. And they would talk trash, but it was like in a fun, hey, you're 4-5. It was like, you guys aren't that good and we're ranked. But they were great people. Like I really enjoyed getting to know the Utah people. We had a bunch because my parents were in town. My uncle came in town. We had like a big tailgate. It was my first year covering Notre Dame, like full time. And we had a really big tailgate that weekend. And it was really great getting to meet Utah fans. Really nice people. Really enjoyed those folks for sure. And they're absolutely.
You ever want to see a rivalry that's heated? Wait, BYU, BYU Utah rivalry, man, fans get
doesn't
crazy.
It? I mean, they call it the Holy War, right?
Holy War, yeah. Or it was. I don't know if they got rid of it, but yeah, it was.
But when the word war is a part of your rivalry, it's not going to be a fun, slap hands kind of thing. There's no.
I remember. I think it was Zach Wilson's freshman or his sophomore year. He was talking a lot of trash, and I remember Utah let him have it on Twitter for a year after that game. Like, whoa, man, they hated BYU so much. It was crazy.
Yep. Let's see here. And here we go. Last one, I believe. 99 problems became one. Predict the final score of the Alabama versus Texas A&M game this season. I'm putting the over-under at 90 points, and I don't expect Texas A&M to get more than 6. I'm very curious to see how that one pans out.
It's going to be ugly. It's going to be like 38-14 or something, 38-17. Yeah. It's going to be ugly.
It's going to be it's not. It's really not. I don't see that one being overly competitive. And I don't think it was going to be all that competitive to begin with. Like, it's funny. I saw in the article I wrote, Ryan, I don't know if you had a chance to read it or not yet, but it was so ESPN updated their preseason top 25, and they put USC from 12th to 4th because they have Jordan Addison now. And which I'm like, you guys know that all these years they've sucked. They've always had good receiver. Like, that's not like who's like, man, USC don't have good enough, enough good receivers.
They were talking about when they literally in the recent past, had Drake London, Michael Pittman Jr., and Amon-Ra St. Brown on the same team.
And Tyler Vaughns, who was
Right,
a
and
good
Tyler
player but
Vaughns.
got hurt. If he doesn't
Right.
get hurt as a senior, I think he had a pretty bad injury as a senior. And they had, I mean, go see some of the receivers that Sam Darnold was throwing to in 2017. It wasn't a bunch of bums.
No.
So I find it hilarious, but I had to get in there, my little shade of who they had in the top 10 last year at the same time.
Oh no.
It was fun because last year here's they had Texas A&M in the top 10. The point was I kind of threw some shade at not only USC at 4, but why is A&M 5th? Explain that to me. What has Texas A&M done to warrant being a top 5 team? They replacing their entire defensive line. They're replacing their defensive coordinator. They have a quarterback battle, right? They got a guy from USC or LSU, I mean, who he was a nice player, but it's not like they went and got Caleb Williams or Joe Burrow, the LSU version of Joe Burrow or Justin Fields, right? It's Max Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just had to point out like what their top 10 was last. They had A&M 6th. They had A&M ranked 6th last year, and they went 8-4. And they went 8-4, and they lost to double figures, but to Arkansas and Ole Miss. They lost at home to 7-6 Mississippi State, and then their last game of the year they lost to LSU. Think about that. They lost to LSU. Mm-hmm. Last year they had North Carolina who went 6-7, Iowa State who went 7-6, USC went 4-8, and Indiana who went 2-10 were all part of ESPN's preseason top 10 last year. And I think all except maybe, I mean, the only team of that group that I felt maybe warranted being a potential preseason top 10 team to me was Iowa State. And because of their schedule and we learned, I said last year, Ryan, we were going to learn a lot about Matt Campbell last year because this is the first time in his career he's been the hunted in the Big 12, in the Big 12, and he didn't handle it well. Mm-hmm. But North Carolina, we always said was overrated. Like they lost a 2,000-yard running backs, a 1,000-yard receiver, their best defensive player from a team that went 8-4, and they're going to jump into the top 10 for some crazy reason. USC was overrated, so it's none of it ever made sense. But that's just typical ESPN. But anyway, all right. So that is going to do it, Ryan, for today's show. I appreciate everybody being part of the show today. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate all the feedback. Appreciate the great questions. We are going to try to have a show tomorrow. So that means you need to hit that like button. I think, do we still have Matt? Yes, Matt has it because Mace AK is not with us today. It looks like getting his stuff in there. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, share the podcast, hit the notification bell, and so you never miss when IB goes live. Because Sean and I are going to try to go live tomorrow. It's not finalized. I've got some personal things that may keep us from going live, but we're going to try to get back to our Saturday shows tomorrow. And but you're going to need to know because we may go around 1:00, but it's going to depend on. We're not getting a commitment tomorrow. It's not why we're going to go live. Sean and I are getting back to our Saturday show, which we had started doing. And we're going to try to do that tomorrow, but it's not a guarantee. But if you hit the like button and the subscribe button and the notification bell, especially the notification bell, then you'll be made aware of when we're going to do a show. So also make sure you sign up for irishbreakdown.com, or I would say boards at irishbreakdown.com. It's the Irish Breakdown message board. You're definitely going to be part of that. A lot of intel on there, a lot of good stuff on there. And you're not going to regret it at all. So thanks everybody for being with us today. Appreciate everybody with tons of great questions, tons of great interaction, and appreciate y'all's patience with some of our technical issues that we're working through. We're going to try to get this thing figured out. So have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you for being a part of the Irish Breakdown podcast.